Chapter 2791. Infant Golden Dragons Fall. Insignificant humans. Do you think you can insult me just because I am heavily injured? When the infant golden dragon saw Lionheart, and the other Tier 45 charging toward it, anger flared in its amber pupils, and it let loose a deafening roar. A shockwave immediately spread from the infant dragon to its surroundings. Boom, boom, boom. A series of collisions echoed throughout the cavern as Lionheart and the others got hit by the shockwave. Aside from Lionheart and Solitary 9, everyone else on the team went flying back several dozen meters, a stinging pain washing through their bodies. They also lost over 2 million HP from the attack. Lifeless Thorn and the others, who only had around 6 million HP, had basically lost 1/3 of their HPs to the shockwave. It's still so strong even after getting injured? Everyone gasped when they saw their own HP bar. The infant golden dragon was clearly extremely weakened right now, yet it still managed to inflict so much damage with only its roar. Its strength was simply terrifying. At this time, even Feng was stunned by this situation. In addition to its heavy injuries, the infant dragon was also suffering from the heavenly dragon's breath suppression. Otherwise, everyone would have most likely lost over half of their HP from the shockwave. Tier 3 healers, keep up. Restore the damage dealer's HP with everything you've got. Don't stop even for a moment. Feng, who was currently incapacitated due to the backlash from forcibly canceling the demon summoning, hurriedly issued commands across the distance. You Luo and Faded Fern, you two prioritize healing Lionheart and 9. Make sure their HPs are full at all times. At Feng's command, Faded Fern, a Tier 4 oracle, swung her staff and double-cast 2 Tier 3 curses. Tier 3 Defensive Curse, Contract Barrier. Tier 3 Strengthening Curse, Heavenly God's Prayer. Immediately, a translucent barrier formed around the bodies of Lionheart and Solitary 9. Simultaneously, divine runes appeared on the bodies of everyone on the team, doubling everyone's resistances and defense and increasing everyone's physique by 20% for 20 minutes. She even has a Tier 3 AoE strengthening curse? Feng was surprised as he looked at Faded Fern's strengthening spells were incredibly rare in God's domain. In fact, they were 10 times rarer than ordinary curses of the same tier. This was especially true for AoE strengthening spells. The value of such a spell was practically equivalent to a fragmented legendary item. In his previous life, any player who wielded strengthening spells would receive the VIP treatment from the various superpowers. This was because unlike Berserk skills, strengthening spells had short cooldowns and long durations. An AoE strengthening spell could elevate a team's combat power to a whole other level. In the past, one of the reasons Violet Cloud was recognized as one of the 10 great cleric gods was her possession of many AoE strengthening spells. This prompted the various superpowers to desperately seek her. As far as Feng knew, nobody in the modern god's domain had gained a strengthening spell even now. Yet not only did Faded Fern possess a strengthening spell, but it was even of the AoE variety. How could he not be surprised by this situation? Meanwhile, after Faded Fern cast Heavenly God's Prayer, the team's overall combat power evidently rose by a slight margin. Good. Let's continue. After seeing the barrier protecting his body, Lionheart charged forward once more. This time, the infant dragon no longer attacked with its roar. Instead, it swept its tail at the approaching players. However, despite seeing the tail that shattered even space itself bearing down on him, Lionheart did not back away. Instead, he raised his shield and stood his ground. He then activated the Tier 3 defensive skill, Blood Cloud. A crimson barrier appeared before his body, one capable of absorbing 6 attacks. Although the barrier could fully nullify only attacks at the Tier 4 standard and below, it could still diminish the damage of Tier 5 attacks. Boom. The blood cloud instantly exploded upon coming into contact with the infant dragon's tail. However, thanks to the blood cloud dampening the blow, Lionheart only stumbled 2 steps backward and lost a little over 6 million HP. For Lionheart, who had already reached level 137 and possessed 2 million HP, this amount of damage was still tolerable. Upon seeing that Lionheart could take on the infant dragon's attacks, everyone else on the team breathed out a sigh of relief and began assaulting the infant dragon. Bloodblade used his Tier 4 Legacy skill Storm Dance. Lifeless Thorn also used his Tier 4 Legacy skill Lightning Serpent. Tier 4 skills and spells bombarded the infant dragon's body one after another, every one of them dealing over 50 million damage, with some even doing over 100 million critical damage. However, compared to the infant dragon's remaining 60 billion HP, this amount of damage appeared minuscule. Is the damage still not enough? Feng frowned when he saw the result of the frenzied barrage. Apart from Lionheart, the 5 other Tier 4 players fighting were currently attacking the infant dragon with everything they had. Yet, the damage they caused just barely exceeded the infant dragon's battle recovery. Moreover, this was with the infant dragon's battle recovery have due to its heavy injuries. The Tier 3 healers healing from a distance also couldn't help growing anxious in this situation. At this rate, their team would need more than an hour to finish the battle. Meanwhile, 1 hour was definitely more than enough for the infant golden dragon to recover from its injuries. If that happened, they would be doomed. Lionheart and the others were also aware of the situation. However, this was already the best they could do. Although they could activate their berserk skills to raise their damage output temporarily, doing so would be meaningless, and would prompt the infant dragon to enter its berserk phase earlier. At that time, without their berserk skills, they would be utterly incapable of defending against the infant dragon's attacks. Do any of you have combat resurrection? Feng asked the 12 Tier 3 healers behind him. In the ancient god's domain, ordinary resurrection methods couldn't resurrect players on the spot. One special type of resurrection method could. However, the player resurrected through this method would suffer a higher death penalty. I do. 8 of the Tier 3 healers responded to Feng's question. Good. Go and resurrect the 8 players with the highest strength. Feng breathed out a sigh of relief when he saw how many responses he received. The next moment, the 8 healers with combat resurrection resurrected 8 of Skyflare's fallen members. Take these spears and divide them among yourselves. After looking at the 8 resurrected players, Feng took out the 600+ thunder spears stored in his bag. Drink a master strength potion and activate your berserk skills. Afterward, use everything you have to throw these spears at the infant dragon. It's best if you can use up all these spears before your berserk skills run out. Don't hold back. Yes, sir. The 8 players nodded, fully understanding Feng's intentions. As Tier 3 melee players, they couldn't even be considered cannon fodder in front of the Tier 4 infant dragon. After all, if they tried moving up close to the dragon, they would instantly die to any random roar. The only way they could contribute to the raid was by relying on external items. Only then would they have a chance of dealing damage to the infant dragon. The 8 players consumed the master strength potions they had prepared beforehand, which increased their strength attribute by 70% for 3 minutes. They then activated their respective berserk skills, further improving their basic attributes. In terms of strength, the 8 of them could already rival mythic monsters of the same level. After seeing the infant dragon swing its tail, exposing its back, Feng ordered, "Attack! Aim at the dragon's injuries or the reverse scale on its back." At Feng's command, the 8 melee players promptly threw the thunder spears they held with all their might. Whoosh! 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 The next moment, 8 lightning arcs cut through space and landed on the infant dragon's injuries and reverse scale. Roar! The infant dragon roared in pain at the attacks. Simultaneously, damages exceeding 50 million appeared above its head one after another. There was even one critical hit that dealt over 130 million damage. The 8 melee players' attacks were not the slightest bit weaker than those of Lifeless Thorn and the other Tier 4 combatants. Only the frequency of their attacks was slightly inferior. Good. Next volley. Seeing that the attacks were highly effective, Feng promptly called for another attack. In response, the 8 melee players each took out another thunder spear and hurled the weapons at the infant dragon. When the attacks connected, the infant dragon's HP bar finally shrank, albeit slightly. As expected of the commander. We have a chance now. Solitary 9 couldn't help growing excited when he saw the rate of the infant dragon's HP decrease accelerating. Crimson Billow, who was frantically attacking the infant dragon, looked toward Feng in surprise despite herself. He still has a trump card? She never thought that Feng could actually add 8 more Tier 4 combatants to the fight. Now, with their damage output, killing the infant dragon within a short period was entirely possible. The infant golden dragon's HP continuously decreased over time. 60%, 40%, 30%. The speed at which the infant dragon lost HP was nothing like before. Only, in exchange for this boost in DPS, the supply of thunder spears declined rapidly. In just 2 minutes, the 8 Tier 3 players had already used up more than 400 thunder spears. Everyone be careful. It's going berserk. Feng warned when he saw that the infant dragon's HP bar had fallen to a critical level. As soon as Feng finished speaking, the infant dragon suddenly let out an angry roar. Simultaneously, the dragon's body gave off a dazzling, golden glow, and its eyes turned bloodshot. It had evidently entered a berserk state. Alright. Since Brother Black Flame has let us see his cards, let's show him ours as well. Glancing at Fated Fern, Lionheart shouted. Fern, it's your turn now. Leave it to me. Fated Fern smiled. She then took out the Tier 5 sealing crystal from her bag and began chanting an incantation. Immediately, as if time had frozen, silence fell over the entire cavern. The only exception to this phenomenon was the gradually shattering crystal in Fated Fern's hand. Before the infant golden dragon could smash its claw at Lionheart, a magic spear several hundred meters long suddenly appeared above the infant dragon and struck its head. Tier 5 spell, Destruction Spear. Boom. The infant dragon's titanic body instantly collapsed to the ground, the impact creating a crater several dozen meters deep. The space surrounding the crater even turned into a dark void. The next moment, a damage value exceeding 10 billion appeared above the infant dragon's head. In addition, not only did the infant dragon's berserk state get interrupted, but the infant dragon was even powerless to push itself off the ground. The power of the destruction spear stupefied everyone present. Even Feng never thought that the sealing crystal would hold such a powerful spell. The destruction spear was just slightly inferior to the Great Demon King's attack from before. Good. Everyone, attack with everything you've got. Feng shouted. Ignoring the fact that he was still in a weakened state, he activated Power of Darkness, which allowed him to move his body. He then charged straight at the incapacitated infant dragon. As for everyone else, they too activated their berserk skills at Feng's command, instantly doubling their basic attributes. Damages exceeding 100 million appeared above the infant dragon's head one after another. 10%, 6%, 3%. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Just as the infant dragon was about to recover from its incapacitated state, Feng activated Divine Providence before using his strongest trump card. Tier 3 skill, Blade Awakening. Tier 4 skill, Lightning Edge. The next moment, Feng, who had entered a transcendent state, brandished the abyssal blade. A river of light then descended upon the infant golden dragon's body. Minus 135,474,514. Minus 129,435,471. Minus 264,854,214. A series of damages exceeding 100 million appeared above the infant golden dragon's head in rapid succession, the attack thoroughly plundering its remaining HP. Chapter 2792. Astonishing Harvest. The infant golden dragon uttered a mournful cry as its titanic body crashed to the ground. Subsequently, an unprecedented silence descended on the cavern. We did it. We succeeded. Everyone heaved a deep sigh of relief when they looked at the infant dragon's corpse lying on the ground. Simultaneously, an indescribable sense of joy and excitement also appeared on their faces. After all, they had just created a miracle, a full dragon-slaying battle. Even if their opponent was merely a Tier 4 infant dragon, they had still slain a real dragon. The next moment, before the survivors of the team could recover from their joy, brilliant flashes suddenly enveloped their bodies as their experience bars filled up rapidly. The amount of EXP the infant golden dragon awarded was leagues above the EXP from ordinary mythic bosses. Even Feng leveled up 3 times consecutively, reaching 32% of level 140. As for everyone else, they gained even more levels from the raid, with Lionheart reaching level 141, and Yuluo reaching level 139. Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 even went from level 127 to level 138. The amount of EXP everyone received stupefied them. Nobody thought that killing a level 140 infant dragon would grant so much EXP. Of those present, only Feng and Lionheart did not place much concern on their levels. After all, as veteran Tier 4 players, they knew very clearly how easy it was for Tier 4 players to gain levels. In fact, they could most likely attain level 150 in 10 days, reaching the minimum requirement to challenge their Tier 5 promotion. However, players would not necessarily be able to get promoted to Tier 5 just by meeting the level requirement. After all, players would have to create a powerful mana body of their own. Compared to the levels he gained, Feng was much more concerned about the infant golden dragon's loot. The infant golden dragon they had killed was a dragon in the truest sense, not one that the main god system had weakened drastically. This point was clear just from the EXP the infant golden dragon awarded. Compared to the magic dragon clan that Feng had killed some time back, the infant golden dragon was like an entirely different creature. Sometime after the infant golden dragon died, sacred light descended from the cavern ceiling, illuminating the entire cavern. Simultaneously, melodious hymns also echoed in everyone's mind. It seems divine providence did its job. Feng sighed in relief when he saw the sacred light shining down from the ceiling. Although divine providence increased his luck attribute significantly, the hidden attributes effects would be diminished when dealing with monsters at the superior mythic standard or above. And while the infant golden dragon was considered only a mythic monster, it was still part of the dragon race. It was far stronger than ordinary superior mythic monsters of the same level. Hence, the fact that he managed to trigger a divine hymn was truly a stroke of luck. Of course, part of the reason he managed to trigger a divine hymn was most likely this being the first kill of a real dragon in the ancient god's domain. Meanwhile, as the divine hymn descended, a system notification also entered everyone's ears. System. Congratulations. You have killed a Tier 4 infant golden dragon. You have obtained the Dragon Slayer title, World Reputation plus 100, and 1 gold legacy treasure chest. Crap. There's such a benefit as well? Bloodblade was astonished when he saw the system notification. Initially, he thought that they would be working for Feng for free. He never imagined that slaying the infant dragon would earn them such astonishing rewards too. At this time, even Lionheart was surprised by this situation. After all, the rewards were simply too lucrative. Firstly, the Dragon Slayer title would allow them to enjoy the status of a high noble in the various cities of God's domain. In fact, their authority would be even greater than the typical high nobles, close to reaching that of a city lord. Not to mention, with the Dragon Slayer title equipped, their basic attributes and physique would increase by 20% when dealing with dragon-type monsters in the future. As for the awarded gold legacy treasure chest, it was something all Tier 4 players would dream of obtaining. The gold legacy treasure chest had a considerable chance of awarding a legacy book, which would grant the user with a significant number of legacy skill points when used. The treasure chest also had a high chance of containing rare Tier 4 skill and spell books, as well as a small chance of containing a legacy guidance for the road beyond Tier 4. These rewards were far more valuable than weapons, equipment, and magic crystals. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that the gold legacy treasure chest's value was equivalent to a fragmented legendary items. For some people, the treasure chest was even better than a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, aside from the reward notification, Feng, Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yuluo received a second system notification. System warning. The world of God's domain has noticed your existence as an outsider. You will be expelled from the world in one natural day. Sure enough, it was a success. Feng revealed a faint smile upon seeing the system warning. If killing the infant golden dragon and altering a small portion of God's domain's history could not get him out of the ancient God's domain, he would really have a headache. After all, he had already achieved his original goal in coming here, and he still had many matters he needed to deal with in the modern God's domain. He simply couldn't afford to waste time here. As for the matter of earning various resources here, that was supposed to be a long-running project. Moreover, the amount of resources he could obtain depended entirely on the Skyflare Adventurer team's strength and resources. Meanwhile, Skyflare's development couldn't be accomplished overnight. This is great. I can finally go home. As for Yuluo, she too grew joyful when she saw the system warning. In fact, she felt even happier at seeing this system warning than when she received the Gold Legacy treasure chest. While everyone rejoiced over the Gold Legacy treasure chest they received, over 100 items appeared in midair and began descending to the ground. The sight of the infant golden dragon's loot made everyone present momentarily forget about the legacy treasure chest. B/B, the aura of items can actually reach such an intensity? Crimson Billow was astonished as she studied the items that were gradually piling up on the ground. Just what kind of items dropped? Could there be a legendary item? This question plagued everyone's mind. The reason for everyone's reaction was the aura that the infant dragon's loot radiated, which practically rivaled that of superior mythic monsters. Even ordinary Tier 3 players would have to expend a lot of effort just to approach the loot. At this time, only Feng managed to remain relatively calm. This was because he had heard of other people slaying dragons before. Only, the dragons that the God-ranked expert teams killed back then weren't Tier 4 infant dragons, but adult dragons at the peak of Tier 5. According to what he had heard, the sight of those dragons' loot was truly a spectacle to behold. Just the visual phenomenon the loot created had covered a radius of over 10,000 yards. The combined aura the items radiated had also been so powerful that even Tier 4 players couldn't approach the loot. Only Tier 5 players and above could do so. In comparison, the visual phenomenon created by the infant golden dragon's loot only covered a radius of several hundred yards. The aura the loot radiated was so weak that even Tier 3 peak experts could approach it if they gritted their teeth. Hence, Feng didn't find this outcome particularly surprising. However, the infant golden dragon's loot and Tier 5 adult dragon's loot wouldn't actually have a significant difference in quality. What difference in quality there was would only be akin to the difference between an epic item and a fragmented legendary item. It wouldn't be as significant as the difference between a fragmented legendary item and a legendary item. After all, both kills were dragons. One side was just slightly stronger. Moreover, as Tier 6 God-ranked experts were responsible for killing the adult dragons, the loot quality was reduced. In comparison, their team had defeated a Tier 4 infant dragon without a single Tier 5 player on the team. If one were to talk about raid difficulty, their team faced a much greater difficulty than the Tier 6 God-ranked expert teams. I wonder if it dropped a complete Saint guidance. If one did drop, I might be able to improve my mana body further. Feng prayed inwardly as he looked at the items slowly piling up on the ground. At this time, compared to materials, weapons, and equipment, what he hoped to obtain more was a legacy guidance. This was typical of Tier 4 experts. After all, even with multiple fragmented legendary items, a Tier 4 expert wouldn't be able to go up against Tier 5 existences. As for the possibility of the infant golden dragon dropping a legendary item, that was utterly impossible. As far as Feng knew, players couldn't obtain legendary items through killing monsters. It didn't matter even if the monster in question was a dragon. At best, monsters would only drop fragmented legendary items that could be repaired into legendary items. Thus, every legendary item was incredibly precious, and a Tier 5 expert would be fortunate to obtain even one. After another dozen seconds or so passed, all of the items finally landed on the ground. Feng immediately approached the mountain of loot and began sorting through it. The spectating Skyflare members couldn't help drooling, wishing they could help Feng with the loot. Guild leader Black Flame has really hit the jackpot this time. I wonder if a legendary item dropped? If he gets a legendary item, his combat power would most likely skyrocket and approach the Tier 5 standard. Wind Chaser sighed as he enviously watched Feng collect the loot. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. He finally understood how big a gap divided Tier 4 and Tier 5 existences. It was even larger than the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 existences. Ordinary weapons and equipment couldn't make up for this gap. Only the rumored legendary weapons and equipment might work. If Feng could get himself a legendary weapon now, he would truly become an invincible existence. After all, No Tier 4 player could go up against Tier 5 existences yet. Meanwhile, after working non-stop for 10 minutes, Feng finally finished sorting through the loot. Once he organized the loot, he had to press his hand against his chest to suppress the excitement in his heart. The loot drop this time was simply too amazing. It was definitely the most amazing loot he had ever seen. This included even the loot he had seen in his previous life. Setting all else aside, just the golden longsword sitting in his bag had very nearly made him faint from happiness. This weapon was one of God's domain's 10 great legendary weapons, as well as one of God's domain's 36 famed swords. It was also the prototype of the weapon Void Breaker, and could cut all existences. Its name was the Light of Two Worlds, also known as the World-Breaking Gold. Chapter 2793. World Authority. The golden longsword covered in crimson divine runes sitting inside his bag was definitely the dream weapon of all swordsmen. So, that's why the Light of Two Worlds was rumored to have been destroyed and no longer existed in God's domain in the past. Feng couldn't help his elation as he inspected the longsword in his bag. As it turns out, the weapon can't be obtained in the modern God's domain, but only in the ancient God's domain. Light of Two Worlds. One-handed sword, fragmented legendary rank, equipment requirement, strength 6000, tier attack power, 270% of strength, attack speed, 3% of agility, all attributes, increases according to the user's level. When equipped, attacks gain the mana annihilation effect, causing a spatial collapse in an area of 4 by 100 yards. Attacks have a 50% chance to deal 300% damage. Strength increased by 70%. Agility increased by 60%, intelligence increased by 30%, endurance increased by 60%, attack speed increased by 40%, ignore levels plus 50, all sword type skills effect increased by 40%, all sword type skills plus 1 level, effective mana increased by 50%. Additional skill 1 spatial slash, tier 441 attack, increases strength by 200%, power by 2 ranks, up to Tier 5 advanced rank at maximum, and attack range to 1000 yards. Cooldown, 40 seconds. Additional skill 2 Golden Soul. Tier 4 improves perception of magic elements by 200% and mana control by 300%. Reduces all concentration consumption by 70%. Duration, 1 minute. Cooldown, 6 hours. Additional skill 3 World Breaker. Tier 4 consumes half of the user's concentration and mana to enhance the Light of Two Worlds, granting the weapon the power to break worlds for 1 attack. Forcibly increases the power of attack by 1 tier, up to Tier 5 advanced rank at maximum. Cooldown, 1 hour. Created by the ancient God of Light. The Light of Two Worlds possesses the power to cut all things. The divine power sources within the weapon have been destroyed by an inexplicable power. However, as the weapon itself is still intact, it is possible to fully repair it by injecting new divine power sources. Divine power source injected. 0/2. Despite being the prototype of the Void Breaker, the Light of Two Worlds had still managed to rank number 1 among God's domain's 36 famed swords. One could easily imagine how powerful the weapon was. Although the Light of Two Worlds was currently incomplete, just the basic attributes it provided already made it far superior to even the Abyssal Blade. It undoubtedly had the highest attack power out of all the one-handed swords Feng had ever seen. Not to mention, there were also the outrageous skills the weapon carried. Just by wielding the Light of Two Worlds, a Tier 4 swordsman would be capable of exchanging one move with a Tier 5 existence. This was a feat that was impossible with ordinary fragmented legendary weapons. However, while the Light of Two Worlds was incredibly powerful, its usage condition was also astonishingly high. Without the several fragmented legendary items on Feng, he wouldn't be able to equip the weapon. Meanwhile, the Light of Two Worlds' appearance could also be considered heaven-sent. Now that Feng had reached level 140, both the Twilight Blade and Killing Ray could no longer keep up with his level. Hence, he had mainly been fighting with only the Abyssal Blade all this time, with the Twilight Blade and Killing Ray as support. However, now that he had the Light of Two Worlds, he could arm both his main and subarms with adequate weapons. In fact, even if he failed to collect the 2 remaining fragments of Solomon's sword, he wouldn't have to worry about finding a replacement weapon. Moreover, Even if he did manage to complete Solomon's sword, the complete light of two worlds wouldn't be the slightest bit inferior to it. The only problem was that divine power sources were incredibly hard to find. In fact, Feng had only ever heard rumors of divine power sources. He had never actually seen one before. This was because divine power sources were far more valuable than god crystals. They were the power sources of gods, and they carried incredible strength. The value of a divine power source was comparable to a legendary item. Meanwhile, the light of two worlds actually required two divine power sources. It seems I'll need to have the guild investigate divine power sources. Looking at the light of two worlds, Feng inwardly resolved to repair the weapon, no matter the cost. Legendary weapons were far too rare in God's domain. Now that one had appeared before him, it would be a huge waste if he did not try to repair it. Meanwhile, after seeing Feng had finished sorting through the loot, Lifeless Thorn and the others approached him with curious eyes. "Commander, did anything good drop this time?" Looking at Feng, Solitary 9 asked in a whisper, "Did a legendary item really drop?" They had just defeated an unrestrained Tier 4 infant dragon. If Feng said nothing good dropped, nobody would believe him. Solitary 9 was very curious to find out just how excellent the infant golden dragon's loot was. After all, there was still no news of any player obtaining a legendary item, so nobody could tell how powerful legendary items were. If a legendary item had truly appeared among the items dropped, they would have hit a huge jackpot. "Aren't you guys taking legendary items too lightly? There's no way a legendary item can drop from a monster." Feng smiled and shook his head when he saw the excited expressions of Solitary 9 and the others. He then said vaguely, "However, while there is no legendary item in the loot, there are several items whose value is comparable to legendary items. To me, at least, these items are almost as valuable as actual legendary items." He had no intention of telling everyone the specifics of the items dropped this time. This was because the loot was truly astonishing. Aside from the light of two worlds, there were two other items that could easily cause a sensation among God's domain's various powers. One of the two was a magic array design. Although the design only recorded a master magic array, this master magic array was more valuable than even some grandmaster magic arrays. This was because this magic array existed only in the ancient god's domain, the 12-array magic world. This magic array could increase the density of all mana within its area of influence by 200% and players' mana perception by 100%. Although it only had two specific functions, if brought back to the modern god's domain, it would definitely stand at the peak among all magic arrays in existence. As for the second item, it was a mysterious flame. Be it in the ancient god's domain or modern god's domain, mysterious flames were incredibly rare items, especially Tier 3 mysterious flames and above. A Tier 3 mysterious flame was just as rare as a fragmented legendary item. Meanwhile, the mysterious flame the infant golden dragon dropped was the Tier 4 mysterious flame Hellfire. A Tier 4 mysterious flame was something Feng had only ever heard about in God's domain. According to rumor, after reaching Tier 4, mysterious flames would all possess astonishing power and a variety of incredible effects. Take the Soul Fire, for example. It was a mysterious flame capable of annihilating a player's soul, leaving the said player with no choice but to delete their accounts and restart from scratch. Such a feat was impossible for most Tier 5 existences. Moreover, even if a Tier 5 existence had the ability to wipe out a player's soul, it would only work on low-tier players. As players reached higher tiers, their souls would also grow stronger and become more resistant to destruction. After a certain point, even a Tier 6 god wielding the power to annihilate the immortal souls of players wouldn't be able to force the said player to delete their account. Nevertheless, the Tier 4 Soul Fire could easily annihilate even the souls of Tier 3 players. Only after reaching Tier 4 would players become somewhat resistant to the Soul Fire's strength. This was also why the corrosive effect of the mysterious NPC's soul chain had weakened considerably after Feng had reached Tier 4, allowing Feng to live for much longer. Now he had obtained a complete Tier 4 mysterious flame. It was different from the incomplete soul fire that he had gained through the mysterious NPC's soul beast. The other dropped items were similarly very precious. Out of the 100+ items dropped, Over 30 were legendary materials such as dragon claws, dragon teeth, dragon scales, and dragon blood. There were also over a dozen master recipes and epic equipment forging designs. The rest were mainly inferior legendary materials and level 150 epic weapons and equipment. Two materials stood out among all that bounty, both inferior divine artifact ranked materials. The Dragon Eye and the Dragon Crystal. These were the quest items Angelica Teresa needed. Meanwhile, after hearing Feng's words, Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 stopped asking questions. They understood that the items dropped this time were extraordinary and could not be revealed. Moreover, Feng had already answered the main question plaguing their minds. There was no legendary item among the dropped items. Yuluo, you guys start resurrecting the others. We'll return to Meteorite City afterward, Feng said to the team's healers as he looked at the dead Skyflare members' corpses scattered around the cavern. Once everyone was alive again, Feng opened a spatial gate in the direction of Meteorite City. Thanks to the spatial gate, the return trip, which should have originally taken a dozen hours or so by flying ship, only took 4 hours, astonishing Skyflare's members. If not for the spatial gate's long cooldown and short duration, it would have definitely been considered a godly skill in God's domain. After returning to Meteorite City, Feng completed all his transactions with Lionheart. Aside from the Crimson Dragon flying ship, Lionheart also purchased an additional 20 crystals of souls and 100 drops of soul water, which netted Feng an additional 6 million magic crystals. Lionheart also used 3 million pieces of mana ore, which was treated as equivalent to 750,000 magic crystals, to exchange for another 5 crystals of souls. Although the mana ore's price had been slightly inflated, this was unavoidable, as purchasing mana ore in bulk was incredibly difficult. Purchasing too many would naturally raise the ore's market value. However, for Feng, getting 3 million pieces of mana, or for the price of just 750,000 magic crystals, was already a bargain. After the transactions with Lionheart, Feng passed 30 crystals of souls and 1,000 drops of soul water to Yenya for her to conduct future transactions with the Skyflare Adventurer team. At the same time, he also tasked her with secretly purchasing some of God's domain's rare items. Finally, after settling all his business affairs, Feng handed the Dragon Eye and the Dragon Crystal to Angelica Teresa, who was still recuperating from her injuries. As soon as he handed over these 2 items, not only did Angelica's favorability of him increase by 100 points, but she also gave him a Tier 5 legacy guidance she had obtained from a Sword Saint. Feng was a little surprised by this reward. Is this the hidden reward for not bringing Angelica Teresa on the raid? While the infant golden dragon had indeed dropped a lot of excellent items, it hadn't dropped any legacy items. This situation had rendered Feng quite speechless at the time. Now, Angelica Teresa directly handed him the legacy guidance he wished for dearly. After the conversation with Angelica, Feng immediately received a system notification. System, congratulations. You have completed the inferior mythical quest World's Choice. You have gained World Authority +2. System, you have obtained World Authority. World Authority currently at level 1. Please feel the specific effects of World Authority on your own. As soon as the system notification appeared, an indistinct chain became visible around Feng's body from the void. A moment later, this chain suddenly disintegrated, and he immediately felt the world around him becoming much clearer than before. He could even sense that his intimacy with the world of the ancient god's domain had improved slightly. The world was no longer as hostile toward him as before. So these are the effects of world authority? Feng was astonished when he sensed the changes to his body. His affinity with the magic elements was at least 50% better than before. His perception of his mana's operating principle had also improved significantly. After careful observation, he noticed that the layer of white mist that hindered his perception had thinned out by roughly 30%. With such a tremendous improvement, his chances of constructing a Tier 5 mana body would increase by at least 20%, at least 10 times more than what a legendary item could provide. Meteorite City, Silver Hotel. After spending half a day experiencing the benefits of having world authority, Feng decided to take a break. I've already made major strides in my mana control in merely half a day of experimenting. At this rate, my control over mana can probably reach the Advanced Master Standard in just half a month. Feng looked at the time in astonishment. Initially, he had estimated that he would take 3 or 4 months to reach the Advanced Master Standard for mana control. Now he would need only half a month to accomplish this feat. The amount of time he could save with World Authority was astonishing. After reaching Tier 4, what was most important to players would no longer be weapons and equipment, but their control over mana. The stronger a Tier 4 player's mana control was, the easier using skills and spells would be. They would also have an easier time constructing their Tier 5 mana body. From what he knew, one's mana control needed to be at the Advanced Master Standard at the very minimum to construct a Tier 5 mana body. In other words, so long as his mana control reached the Advanced Master Standard, he could begin attempting to construct a new mana body. "Commander, it's almost time," Lifeless Thorn said as he entered the room. "Okay, I've finished all my business here already. We can go now." Feng nodded. Afterward, Feng, Lifeless Thorn, and Solitary 9 went in secret to a forest several thousand yards away from Meteorite City, and met up with Yuluo, who had been waiting there for quite some time now. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU Guild Leader Black Flame, will we really be able to return? Yuluo couldn't help asking as she counted down the time. She had tried all sorts of methods to leave the ancient god's domain, yet none of them had succeeded. Although there was the system notifications assurance this time, she still felt a little doubtful. "Relax. The system won't lie to us," Feng said, chuckling when he saw the anxious look on Yuluo's face. Shortly after Feng finished speaking, the system's timer of 1 natural day struck 0. Immediately, the space around the 4 shattered, forming 4 small space-time tiers. An invisible force then pushed them into these space-time tiers. In the blink of an eye, Feng's group of 4 disappeared from the quiet forest, as if they never existed here in the first place. Chapter 2794. God's Domain State of Affairs. This place was a vast, blue ocean with nary a cloud in the sky. At this time, a tear in space spanning over 1,000 yards suddenly appeared above the ocean, its appearance kicking up strong winds that disrupted the peace of this place. A moment after the spatial tear formed, 4 figures flew out of it and plopped into the ocean. Their impact on the water generated waves dozens of meters tall, the commotion attracting the attention of the dozen or so ships sailing nearby. "The mana here is so thin. The sense of rejection is gone. I think we're back." While standing on the ocean's surface, Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yuluo grew excited when they sensed the familiar low mana environment and the lack of rejection from the world. Although the ancient god's domain had plenty of benefits that the modern god's domain did not possess, they had played in the modern god's domain for most of their career in God's domain. Most of the people and matters they knew of were found here. Naturally, they were glad to return to the modern god's domain. Meanwhile, the appearance of Feng's group also gave the players on the nearby ships a huge shock. "Crap. Who are they? How can they stand on water? They should be using some kind of levitating skill." No. If they were using a skill or spell, there should be strong mana fluctuations. But I don't sense any coming from the 4 of them. At this moment, Feng's group of 4 had all their information concealed with their black cloaks, so the surrounding players couldn't uncover any information about them. The only thing the surrounding players were certain of was that the 4 were all players. Knowing this, the surrounding players couldn't help wanting to find out the identity of Feng's group. "Let's hurry up and leave," a level 123, Tier 3 ranger driving an advanced speedboat said. "The situation in this sea zone has been chaotic recently. We'll be doomed if we get dragged into the war between adventurer teams on Dragonheart Island." "Indeed. Let's leave this place quickly. Now that such a huge commotion has occurred here, War Bloods members will definitely come over. If they find us here, they might take us for members of other adventurer teams and kill us," the level 122 shield warrior standing beside the ranger youth said, nodding in agreement. While the players on this advanced speedboat were conversing with each other, Feng and his companions, around 100 yards away, heard every word of their conversation. "So this place is near Dragonheart Island." Feng revealed a faint smile. It seems we were lucky. We didn't get teleported to some dangerous and remote location. Space-time teleportation was incredibly random. If they got teleported into a dangerous location, such as a forbidden land or a special location that prevented teleportation, making their way home would be very troublesome. Nodding, Lifeless Thorn said. But based on these people's words, there seems to be quite a struggle occurring on Dragonheart Island. That's normal. With the NPC population growing continuously, the number of NPCs operating at sea would naturally increase. While they might not be as numerous as the landlocked NPCs, they will still outnumber players by a large margin. And with the participation of NPCs, the various powers will definitely struggle even more desperately among themselves for resources, Feng said, unsurprised by Dragonheart Island's current state of affairs. This was because he had received some news from Liangjing a few days ago. According to her, God's domain was truly messed up right now. And NPC forces had even begun taking action against the guild towns of players. Although the NPC forces did not directly assault guild towns, they still created a lot of trouble inside the guild towns. They forced the guilds running these towns to submit to them and pay a ton of resources and coins in tribute. Otherwise, they would continue their harassment until the guild town imploded. In Feng's previous life, many unrated guilds and third-rate guilds had no choice but to submit to these NPC forces' extortion. After all, if these guilds lacked the income from their guild towns, they would truly be doomed. Now that God's Domain's first major update had arrived ahead of schedule, once the NPCs began taking action with full force, even first-rate guilds and superpowers would have no choice but to pay tribute to the NPC forces to buy time to develop themselves. After all, in God's Domain, players were merely a minority. One could also say that players were outsiders. Apart from immortality, players did not have any advantages over the original inhabitants of God's Domain. God's Domain's inhabitants far outnumbered players when it came to the top combatants both sides possessed. This would remain true even 10 years after God's Domain's launch. Upon hearing Feng's words, a hint of anxiety appeared on Yuluo's face. Immediately, she took to the skies and flew toward the nearby advanced speedboat, her approach giving the 6 players on the boat a fright. These 6 players stared at Yuluo with horrified expressions. Their reaction was because the ability to fly freely in the sky was unique to players at Tier 4 or above. Tier 4 players were existences that even NPCs feared. Although there were only a small number of Tier 4 experts in God's Domain, every one of them was a big shot capable of shaking heaven and earth with their every move. These Tier 4 experts were not existences ordinary Tier 3 experts like themselves could meet. "How may I help you, miss?" The Tier 3 ranger serving as the leader of the party asked respectfully as he looked up at Yuluo. The strong were respected in God's Domain. This fact might not have been evident in the past. However, after experiencing the changes brought by the system's major update and the various NPCs' arrogant behavior, these players thoroughly understood that the world of God's Domain was a much more straightforward and crueler place than the real world. When it came to dealing with Tier 4 powerhouses, if they offended the other party, it wouldn't be strange for them to get annihilated the next second. They also wouldn't be able to do anything about it. "Do you know Heaven's Blade's situation?" Yuluo asked. Heaven's Blade was her home. Its well-being had also been a concern for her all this time. Before she entered the ancient God's Domain, the competition on Dragonheart Island had already been incredibly intense. Heaven's Blade had even clashed with several of the island's top adventurer teams and suffered casualties numbering in the thousands. This was why she had risked grinding and exploring a dangerous location by herself. Since her disappearance from the modern God's Domain until now, a month had gone by. Meanwhile, 1 month was more than enough for the entirety of God's Domain to undergo significant changes, let alone a small place like Dragonheart Island. Heaven's Blade. The ranger youth was surprised and confused by Yuluo's question. "What? Have you never heard of Heaven's Blade before?" Yuluo frowned. "Or do you not want to say it?" As Yuluo's voice chilled, the Tier 3 shield warrior and the others shuddered involuntarily and looked toward the ranger youth. They didn't know whether they should speak up. Although Yuluo hadn't revealed any killing intent thus far, Her aura alone was already more than enough to instill fear in them. After all, they had personally witnessed just how powerful a Tier 4 player could be. A Tier 4 player could kill hundreds of Tier 3 players with just the flip of a hand. The silence had stretched out for a second when the ranger youth wiped away the cold sweat on his forehead and said hurriedly, "Miss, you misunderstand me. It's not that I refuse to tell you. It's just that this matter is already common knowledge in God's domain. I was just wondering why you would ask such a question, miss." Common knowledge in God's domain? Yuluo couldn't help feeling a little confused. According to Feng, before his group entered the ancient God's domain, nothing big had happened to Heaven's Blade. It had simply been competing with Dragonheart Island's several top adventurer teams for resources as usual. Feng had left the modern God's domain only a few days ago. Logically, nothing significant should have happened to Heaven's Blade. That's right. This incident caused quite the commotion back then. It affected over a dozen superpowers, the ranger said, nodding. 3 days ago, through some unknown means, not only did Warblood enter into an alliance with one of Dragonheart Island's local NPC forces, but someone from Warblood also got promoted to Tier 4. As a result, Warblood's influence on the island skyrocketed, and even 13 thrones suffered losses at the hands of Warblood. What about Heaven's Blade? Yuluo asked. Heaven's Blade. The ranger hesitated to answer because he knew that the Tier 4 powerhouse before him was definitely related to Heaven's Blade. After taking a deep breath, he continued. Heaven's Blade disbanded 2 days ago. Disbanded? Yuluo was stunned. How is this possible? She had developed from the ground up together with Heaven's Blade, and the adventurer team was basically her home. Yet now she was being told that Heaven's Blade had disbanded? At this moment, let alone Yuluo, even Feng was stunned when he overheard the ranger's words from a distance. Heaven's Blade was one of Dragonheart Island's top 5 adventurer teams. Not only did the adventurer team boast close to 10 peak experts under its command, but its commander, Zwei, was even one of Dragonheart Island's top 3 MTs. In the past, Zwei had also been a legendary figure, and she had developed Heaven's Blade into an overlord-like existence in God's domain. Hence, hearing that Heaven's Blade had actually disbanded now came as a shock to him. If Heaven's Blade disbanded, where did Heaven's Blade's executives go? Suppressing the emotions in her heart and doing her best to stay calm, Yuluo asked in a quivering voice. Where did Commander Zwei and the others? Shaking his head, the ranger replied. This I do not know. I only know that Heaven's Blade seems to have enraged Warblood. Warblood is still hunting down Heaven's Blade's members even now, going as far as sealing off Dragonheart Island. People on Dragonheart Island can't contact the outside world. Even those seeking to leave Dragonheart Island need to go through Warblood's inspection. If I were to guess, Heaven's Blade's executives have probably left Dragonheart Island and already gone somewhere else to develop. I understand. You may go now. Yuluo could no longer remain calm after listening to the ranger's words. After waving her hand at the party of 6, indicating that they were free to continue with their business, she turned around and flew back to Feng's group. After hearing Yuluo's words, the party of 6 felt like death row prisoners who had just been granted amnesty. Hurriedly, they sailed away from the area on their advanced speedboat, not daring to remain for even a moment longer lest Yuluo change her mind and vent her anger on them. Yuluo, what do you plan to do now? Feng asked as he took in Yuluo's downcast expression. According to their original plan, they would go their separate ways after returning to the modern era. However, it turned out that Heaven's Blade had disbanded. And Yuluo probably couldn't save Heaven's Blade by herself. Me? Feng's question left Yuluo at a loss. I don't know. The modern God's domain she was familiar with no longer existed, so she didn't know what she should do. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Since that's the case, why don't we go take a look at Dragonheart Island for now? Feng suggested. I still have some matters to deal with on Dragonheart Island. Meanwhile, although Heaven's Blade has disbanded, I believe Commander Zwei and Heaven's Blade's other executives wouldn't leave the island so easily. After all, their foundation and all their resources are on Dragonheart Island. It would be difficult for them to decide to change their base of operations within a short period. So once we reach Dragonheart Island, you might be able to contact them. Yu Luo's eyes immediately glowed at Feng's words. She felt that what he said was indeed true. Heaven's Blade's members had been residing on Dragonheart Island for such a long time now. How could they possibly just pack up and leave? Not to mention, even if Heaven's Blade was no more, she could still contact Commanders Vi and the others. After all, unlike the ancient God's domain, long-range communication between players was possible in the modern God's domain. Okay. I'll follow you, Guild Leader Black Flame. Yu Luo nodded. Afterward, Feng opened a spatial gate and teleported toward Dragonheart Island. Chapter 2795, Dragonheart Island's Chaos. The waters surrounding Dragonheart Island. Over 1,000 ships were currently scattered around the islands surrounding Dragonheart Island, all bearing the mark of the Warblood Adventurer team. Any ship traveling to Dragonheart Island had to submit to Warblood's inspection. In addition, as Dragonheart Island was enveloped by a sealing magic array, communication between the island and the outside world was impossible. Teleportation into and out of the island was also blocked. At this time, Dragonheart Island was practically Warblood's territory. Damn it. Warblood is too vicious. We clearly aren't Heaven's Blade's members. Yet they charged us 3 magic crystals and 20 ancient bronze just for leaving Dragonheart Island. A level 114, Tier 2 berserker driving a speedboat cursed angrily as he watched the departing speedboat belonging to Warblood. Shoo. Keep your voice down. They still haven't gone far. A level 120, Tier 3 elementalist on the same speedboat hurriedly covered the angry berserker's mouth. He then warned, Warblood has the final say on everything on Dragonheart Island right now. Even the superpowers have no choice but to go along with Warblood's whims. We are leaving Dragonheart Island to sell our haul this time. We'll be finished if we get targeted. I wonder what Heaven's Blade did to anger Warblood to such an extent. Even now, Warblood is still hunting for Heaven's Blade's members. The captured members are even sent to be imprisoned by NPCs. A level 117, Tier 2 Oracle mused when she saw that Warblood's speedboat was already more than 300 yards away. Isn't that obvious? Warblood's clearly trying to get Heaven's Blade's lands near the World Tower. The Berserker said indifferently. They are discovering more and more treasures in the World Tower's underground floors right now. The 4th underground floor is especially amazing. However, the abnormal energy in the 4th floor is overwhelming, and the food needed to recover from this energy is incredibly expensive and uneconomical. The only other way to recover quickly is to rest in the special region around the World Tower. Meanwhile, Heaven's Blade owns a total of 5 plots of land in that special region, including the sole large-sized plot in the special zone, and a medium-sized plot. Warblood is currently in a frenzy to expand its influence, so how can it possibly let such a fat piece of meat get away? Indeed. The lands around the World Tower are in high demand right now. Since Warblood has already forced Heaven's Blade to disband, it naturally won't let go of Heaven's Blade's lands. The reason Warblood is capturing Heaven's Blade's members is simply to force Heaven's Blade's commander to submit and give up those lands, the Elementalist youth said, nodding. However, I doubt Heaven's Blade will give up so easily. After all, so long as Heaven's Blade has those 5 plots of land, it can make a comeback any time. When the players aboard the speedboat spoke of the World Tower, they couldn't help a sense of yearning for it. Before the players on Dragonheart Island began exploring the World Tower's 4th underground floor, they hadn't placed much importance on the lands around the World Tower. After all, those lands were absurdly expensive. Moreover, they were far from Dragonheart Island's business district. Naturally, nobody had been willing to purchase them. However, after players began exploring the 4th underground floor, they found that it actually housed Tier 4 legacy lands. As a result, the 4th underground floor was now a bone of contention for all superpowers in God's domain. Unfortunately, there were only 34 plots of land around the World Tower, which weren't even enough to divide among the local player forces, let alone the foreign superpowers. Moreover, it turned out that not only did Heaven's Blade own 5 plots of land in that special zone, but the adventurer team had even gotten its hands on the best one. How could this not make the various superpowers in Warblood go crazy? Before the party of 6 could continue their conversation, A loud explosion suddenly sounded in the distance. Immediately, the party of 6, together with the other players in the vicinity, turned to look toward the origin of the explosion. The next moment, what entered everyone's eyes was a group of around 30 cloaked players summoning 2 flying mounts. The 2 Tier 3 peak experts leading the team worked together and rapidly finished off 20 Tier 3 Warblood experts. Afterward, they each hopped onto a flying mount and broke through Warblood's encirclement together with their team. It's Heaven's Blade's remnants. Activate the magic array. Don't let them escape. When the nearby Warblood members saw this scene, they promptly sprang into action. Suddenly, the several dozen Warblood speedboats positioned around the 2 flying mounts set up a sealing barrier. It was evident that Warblood's members were prepared for Heaven's Blade's members. The next moment, before the 2 flying mounts could ascend 200 yards into the air, they were trapped within a magic barrier covering over 1,000 yards. The translucent barrier had visible runes decorating it. One could easily tell that it was an advanced magic array at a glance. If trapped by this barrier, even Tier 4 mythic monsters would need a lot of time to break out of it, let alone Tier 3 players. Damn it! The female Guardian Knight leading Heaven's Blade's team cursed when she saw the barrier, a trace of frustration appearing in her eyes. She then turned to the man standing at the front of the other flying mount and asked, "Vice Commander Shadow, what should we do? It'll take us at least 3 minutes to break out of this barrier. That's more than enough time for Warblood's members to surround us." At the Guardian Knight's words, the man named Divine Shadow standing atop the flying serpent frowned. It was clear that he hadn't expected Warblood to use such a powerful move against them. "We have no choice but to fight. I'll activate my berserk skill and distract them afterward. In the meantime, you guys figure out a way to escape this place," Divine Shadow said as he looked at Warblood's approaching experts. He then turned to the female knight Cleansing Flame and added, "Remember, do everything you can to leave. Even if it means escaping by yourself. Only if you escape will Heaven's Blade have hope." "Yes, sir," Cleansing Flame answered, a solemn expression appearing on her face. Now that Heaven's Blade had already disbanded and Warblood was even hunting down Heaven's Blade's members on Dragonheart Island, Heaven's Blade's only hope of making a comeback was to seek help from the outside world. With the deeds of the Special Zone's lands in her hands, it was entirely possible to recruit the help of a super guild if they paid a certain price. However, before Cleansing Flame could control her flying serpent to head for the barrier's edge, a powerful voice echoed in the ears of Heaven's Blade's members. "Escape? Do you think it's that easy? None of you should think of leaving today." Before Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame could react to the situation, a man suddenly appeared in front of them. This crimson-eyed man wore a dark red robe and held a crimson wooden staff. His entire being also gave off an indescribably evil feeling. Just by hovering in the air, this evil-looking man exerted a powerful pressure on Heaven's Blade's members. Divine Shadow and the others felt as if a mountain were weighing down their bodies. They could also feel the mana surrounding them growing hostile. Autumn Plant. A hint of confusion appeared in Divine Shadow's eyes when he saw the crimson-robed man. "Impossible. Shouldn't you be leading a team to the 4th floor?" The evil man blocking their team was none other than Autumn Plant, one of Warblood's 4 great vice commanders, as well as Warblood's sole Tier 4 member. As a great wizard, he was in existence capable of destroying half of a small island with one attack. Previously, Autumn Plant had even single-handedly wiped out tens of thousands of 13 Thrones' experts, using a single Tier 4 large-scale destruction spell. Over 20 of the casualties were Void Realm experts, and 3 were Domain Realm experts. As a result of this severe loss, 13 Thrones had no choice but to back off from competing with Warblood. After this battle, Autumn Plant had also been crowned the undisputed #1 player on Dragonheart Island. Meanwhile, it was because they had caught wind that Autumn Plant had left for the World Tower's 4th underground floor that they had attempted to escape Dragonheart Island. Yet now, if I didn't visit the 4th floor, would you remnants be willing to come out? Autumn Plant sneered contemptuously as he looked down on Divine Autumn and the others. "You tricked us." Divine Shadow clenched his fists in anger. He never thought that he would fall for Autumn Plant's trap. "We've always been rivals in the past. Now that you've gotten promoted to Tier 4, I want to see just how strong you've become. After saying so, Divine Shadow activated his Berserk skill, his aura skyrocketing to the point of rivaling Tier 4 mythic monsters. At this time, if comparing purely in terms of aura, Divine Shadow was not the slightest bit inferior to Autumn Plant. Fool! When Autumn Plant sensed the intensity of Divine Shadow's aura skyrocketing, his scion remained unchanged. Instead, he merely waved his hand. Before Divine Shadow could react, over a dozen crimson chains appeared out of thin air and bound his body. And despite struggling with all his might, he couldn't break free from their restraint, no matter what. On the contrary, his resistance weakened as time passed. How is this possible? Cleansing Flame was stunned. Divine Shadow was one of Heaven's Blade's few domain realm experts. With his Berserk skill activated, logically he should be able to put up a good fight against a Tier 4 player. Yet, Divine Shadow was captured instantly. Autumn Plant had thoroughly shattered their understanding of Tier 4 existences. Humph. You people don't know just how massive the gap between Tier 3 and Tier 4 classes is. Do you really think you can turn things around when going up against me? Looking at Cleansing Flame's stunned expression, Autumn Plant sneered. Let alone one domain realm expert. Even 10 domain realm experts working together won't last more than 3 moves against me. Realizing the difference between them, Divine Shadow turned to Cleansing Flame and the others and shouted, Damn it! Damn it! Everyone kill yourselves. Don't let him capture you. Don't even think you can kill yourselves so easily, Autumn Plant said, brandishing his staff. The next moment, blood-red chains appeared from the void and bound Cleansing Flame and the others, preventing them from moving their bodies at all. The difference between the two sides was clear for all to see. How can a Tier 4 class be so powerful? Divine Shadow and the others stared at Autumn Plant with disbelief. They had seen Feng's battle video during the reserve seat competition at the War God's Temple. In their opinion, although Tier 4 players were powerful, they were not an insurmountable opponent. However, they actually couldn't offer even the slightest resistance to Autumn Plant. The strength Autumn Plant displayed far surpassed Feng's. While Heaven's Blade's members were shocked by the massive gap in strength between them and Autumn Plant, Warblood's other members caught up with them and secured them. Alright, take them to the NPCs. Looking at Divine Shadow and the other remnants of Heaven's Blade, Autumn Plant smiled and said, Now that we've caught 2 big fish, I refuse to believe that Zwei won't submit. It's over. It's over. Everything's over this time. Divine Shadow fell into despair when he saw Heaven's Blade's captured members. I've truly doomed you guys this time. The only reason why they had decided to take on such a risky operation this time was the misinformation he had believed. Now, everyone was doomed because of his foolishness. After all, if players were imprisoned by NPCs, nothing would change even if they forcibly logged out of the game. They would still reappear in prison after they logged back into the game. Unless they could break out, they would have to spend at least 15 days in prison. A 15-day gap was more than enough for everyone to fall far behind God's Domain's frontline players. However, as Divine Shadow was falling into a pit of despair and self-reproach, a horned eagle carrying 4 people suddenly came flying over from a distance. To everyone's surprise, the horned eagle actually sported Heaven's Blade's flag extremely conspicuously. More remnants of Heaven's Blade? Seeing as they have a horned eagle, it seems another big fish has arrived. Autumn Plant's lips curled up in delight when he saw the horned eagle. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. Meanwhile, this unexpected situation also confused Divine Shadow and the others. They couldn't understand why one of Heaven's Blade's horned eagles would be flying to them from outside Dragonheart Island. However, when they recalled Autumn Plant's capabilities, they immediately began shouting at the people riding the horned eagle to escape. Although Tier 4 players could fly, their flying speed wasn't comparable to flying mounts. Hence, it was still possible to escape if the horned eagle flew at full speed. Escape? Do you think that's possible? After saying so, Autumn Plant used instantaneous movement and rapidly approached the horned eagle. A Tier 4 Great Wizard's instantaneous movement had a range of 3,000 yards, many times superior to a Tier 3 Great Mage's instantaneous movement. Chapter 2796. Black Flame's astonishing appearance when Divine Shadow and the other Heaven's Blades members saw Autumn Plant teleporting away. Their eyes turned bloodshot, and they desperately tried to stop him. Unfortunately, none of them managed to break free of their restraints, and they could only watch helplessly as the scene before them continued playing out. Damn it! At this moment, Divine Shadow couldn't help wondering why Autumn Plant had managed to get promoted to Tier 4. In terms of combat standards, Autumn Plant couldn't even rank within Dragonheart Island's top 20. The only advantage he had was his race as a half-elf, which granted him a slightly better affinity with mana. However, the promotion quest of half-elves was also much harder than that of humans. For the sake of balance, races with strong talents in God's domain would often find their talents becoming shackles that prevented them from advancing. Hence, not many players were willing to convert to other races. Only those with incredible willpower would take this risky path. As proof of the limitation of other races, Autumn Plant had gotten promoted to Tier 3 slightly later than players of similar levels and combat standards. Yet he was actually the first to reach Tier 4 on Dragonheart Island. This situation was simply unbelievable, no matter how Divine Shadow looked at it. In reality, though, Autumn Plant's promotion to Tier 4 was a complete accident. It wasn't something he had actively sought to accomplish. Instead, his promotion was related to the legacy of his hidden class. Vice Commander, we don't have many Horned Eagles. Aside from the two of the other Vice Commanders remaining on Dragonheart Island, the only other Horned Eagle I can think of belongs to the missing team leader, Yuluo. Cleansing Flame said worriedly as she looked at the approaching Horned Eagle. Could that person flying toward us be team leader Yuluo? It should be, but it's useless to say anything now, Divine Shadow said, smiling helplessly. If we can't do anything against Autumn Plant, what more can Yuluo do? At this time, he no longer held any hopes of Yuluo escaping. It might have been a different story if Yuluo were a scout class, but as a cleric, she wouldn't notice Autumn Plant's rapid approach before it was too late. That's right. Now that Autumn has taken action, they can't escape. You should just obediently follow us back and persuade your commander. At this time, a blue-clad woman suddenly appeared beside Divine Shadow and the others, giving Cleansing Flame and the others a scare. This female ranger was none other than Ink Feather, another one of Warblood's 4 great vice commanders. I never thought that Warblood would send 2 of its vice commanders just to stop us. What an honor, Divine Shadow said provocatively as he looked at Ink Feather. Shadow, there's no point in inciting me. Sneering, Ink Feather said. Even without Autumn here, do you think you can escape me? You should know very well that if we were to fight, I would have a greater chance of winning. Not to mention, I am more proficient at hunting down targets. At Ink Feather's words, Divine Feather stopped speaking as a domain realm expert himself. He had to admit that Ink Feather was powerful. Previously, he could still beat her when she had yet to reach the domain realm. At present, however, not only was Ink Feather in the domain realm already, but it was even rumored that she had obtained a fragmented legendary bow. Her strength was incredibly close to catching up with Tier 4 existences. Hence, in an actual confrontation, the chances that he would lose were indeed very high. You don't have to worry. Yuluo won't be in any pain. Looking at Divine Shadow and the others, Ink Feather smiled faintly and added, She'll soon be like you. Once within Autumn's sight, nobody can escape. Afterward, Ink Feather and the other Warblood members shifted their gaze toward Autumn Plant, who had already popped up before the Horned Eagle. Upon noticing Autumn Plant, the flying Horned Eagle felt uneasy and came to an abrupt stop, looking at the Tier 4 Great Wizard with fear in its eyes. I don't know whether to call you bunch brave or stupid to approach while riding one of Heaven's Blade's Horned Eagles, Autumn Plant said, smiling as he looked at the 4 cloaked figures atop the flying mount. At this time, only 3 people in Heaven's Blade possess a Horned Eagle. Of the 3, 2 are still hiding inside Dragonheart Island. Even if you don't reveal yourselves, I can guess that one of you is that missing team leader, Yuluo, right? Warblood had conducted a detailed investigation into Heaven's Blade's organizational structure after forcing the latter to disband. The sudden disappearance of Yuluo was included in the information they dug 6 up. Yuluo did not bother refuting Autumn Plant's words. She simply looked at the Great Wizard and said calmly, I never thought you would actually be the first on Dragonheart Island to get promoted to Tier 4. That's right. But many more unexpected things have occurred as well, such as the dissolution of Heaven's Blade, and the fact that you're now a prisoner of war blood. Autumn Plant said contemptuously instead of growing enraged at Yuluo's words. Now, do you want me to take action, or are you going to follow me obediently? However, no sooner had Autumn Plant finished speaking than a chuckle came from behind Yuluo. Long time no see, Vice Commander Autumn. It seems you've grown to have quite the arrogant tone. As this voice spread, Autumn Plant's complexion changed, and he stared automatically at the cloaked man standing behind Yuluo. You are. For a moment, Autumn Plant doubted his ears. After all, he was familiar with this voice, to the point where just hearing it disgusted him already. In fact, he even had trouble speaking right now. Black Flame. Autumn Plant's reaction was because this man was the culprit responsible for Warblood's loss of reputation on Dragonheart Island. This man had also very nearly turned Warblood into a joke to the various superpowers. Hence, this man was the person Blood Oath, Warblood's commander, wished to kill the most. That's right. Nodding, Feng removed his hood and smiled at Autumn Plant. We meet again, Vice Commander Autumn. The instant Feng removed his hood, a wave of restlessness spread through the Warblood members spectating the situation from a distance. Heaven's Blade's members were similarly astonished to see Feng. Black Flame was currently a big shot that everybody in God's domain knew of. He had thoroughly risen to fame during the reserve seat competition, as the first player in God's domain to reach Tier 4. Although there hadn't been any news of him recently, his performance during the competition was still being discussed by countless players even today. This is great. It's really Guild Leader Black Flame. Cleansing Flame grew ecstatic when she saw Feng. Although Heaven's Blade wasn't considered allies with Zero Wing, the organizations had a relatively good relationship. In fact, Zero Wing was one of the guilds they intended to seek help from when they were planning to escape from Dragonheart Island. The arrival of Zero Wing's guild leader was undoubtedly a wonderful situation for Heaven's Blade. Moreover, Feng was a Tier 4 player. Even Autumn Plant shouldn't dare act recklessly before him. However, as Cleansing Flame and the others were rejoicing, Inkfeather sneered at them. Don't celebrate too soon. Black Flame's appearance here is just perfect. Looking at Feng's distant figure, Inkfeather smiled faintly. He turned Warblood into everyone's laughingstock previously. Now we'll let him know that he won't get off scot-free for interfering in Warblood's matters. After saying so, Inkfeather shot a dazzling arrow into the sky, which was visible even from 10,000 yards away. Immediately afterward, the Warblood members patrolling on speedboats in the vicinity each took out a stone with strange runes engraved on it. They then began frenziedly pumping their mana into the stone. Suddenly, a storm brewed, blanketing the entire sea zone. Simultaneously, multiple barriers emerged from the ocean, thoroughly enveloping Feng's group of 4. An endless supply of water-type mana also bound them, the restriction weakening their basic attributes and physique by 30%. What a powerful restriction! Feng was a little surprised by this situation. There were very few magic arrays capable of affecting Tier 4 players significantly. Even a Master Magic Array would only be capable of reducing a Tier 4 player's basic attributes. It would hardly affect a Tier 4 player's physique. Nevertheless, the magic array used on them had reduced both their basic attributes and physique by a significant margin. This was truly an amazing magic array. Haha, Black Flame. You've really barged your way into hell now. Autumn Plant burst into delighted laughter when he saw that the magic barrier had taken effect. We originally intended this sea prison to be a present for Heaven's Blade Zwei. Now though, we're giving it to you. What do you think? Under normal circumstances, Autumn Plant would still have to be afraid of Feng. After all, Feng was the first player to reach Tier 4. Hence, Feng's understanding of Tier 4 classes should greatly surpass his own. There was also the fact that the moves Autumn Plant had employed against Tier 3 players would have hardly any effect on Tier 4 players. However, the situation was different now. The Sea Prison was a magic array capable of suppressing even Tier 4 existences significantly. While a 30% reduction of basic attributes couldn't be considered significant, a 30% reduction of physique was massive. Such a suppression would basically reduce a Tier 4 physique to the Tier 3 standard. With such a huge difference in physique, even if Feng possessed astonishing basic attributes, he wouldn't be a match for Autumn Plant. This sea prison is not bad, but you wasted it for nothing. After observing the runes on the barrier, Feng found that this ancient magic array's current performance could only be considered half-baked at best. At the very least, it needed over a dozen master magicians to exhibit its capabilities fully. What arrogance! Upon seeing Feng's nonchalant behavior, Autumn Plant brandished his staff. Death is already knocking on your door. I want to see just how long you can keep up your facade. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. After saying so, Autumn Plant summoned several dozen crimson chains that shot at Feng. Tier 4 legacy spell, Bloodbound Lock. However, just as the crimson chains were about to reach Feng, a ripple of mana came from his body and stopped all of the chains cold 1 meter away from him. Afterward, a voice entered Autumn Plant's ears. This binding spell is pretty good. Unfortunately, you used it on the wrong person. Chapter 2797. Splitting the Sea. As soon as Feng finished speaking, the War Blood members spectating from a distance couldn't help gaping in shock at the scene playing out before them. Their minds refusing to accept this was true. Even Heaven's Blades members felt as if they were dreaming when they saw this scene, having personally experienced the power of those crimson chains. Those chains carried immense power. Even a mythic monster should be incapable of struggling free of them. Moreover, evading those chains was also impossible. Nevertheless, the crimson chains Autumn Plant summoned actually failed to get within 1 meter of Feng. Moreover, they hadn't seen Feng make any movements. From their perspective, the chains seemed to be afraid of Feng, and did not dare move closer to him. Impossible. This is absolutely impossible. Autumn Plant was dumbfounded as he looked at the scene before him. In fact, compared to the surrounding spectators, he was even more confused by this situation. After all, as the summoner of these chains, he knew that he had not held back in the slightest. There's no way he can stop a Tier 4 spell without using any skill or spell of his own. This is absolutely impossible. Glaring at Feng, Autumn Plant demanded, "What did you do?" Had Feng used a skill or spell to stop his spell, Autumn Plant would have found this situation reasonable. However, Feng clearly did not do anything. The man simply unleashed his mana to the surroundings, yet that actually rendered the chains summoned by Bloodbound Lock incapable of getting close to him. At this moment, let alone Autumn Plant, even Yuluo, Lifeless Thorn, and Solitary 9 were surprised by this situation. They knew that Feng was incredibly strong. After all, he had very nearly killed Lionheart in one move. However, they never thought that he could actually stop a Tier 4 binding spell, just by unleashing his mana. This situation had thoroughly shattered their understanding of Feng. Can't you see it very clearly? Looking at Autumn Plant's horrified expression, Feng said calmly, "As a Tier 4 Great Wizard, you should be well aware that a spell's performance is dependent on the difference between the quality of the spell's mana and that of the target's mana. Do you think a fragile rope can restrain an elephant?" After obtaining Level 1 World Authority, aside from a slight improvement in his affinity with and control of mana, he had also gained a significant boost in his understanding of the operating principles of mana. Hence, he was now capable of condensing mana of much higher quality and in much greater quantity. Now the mana he could conjure was at least 50% stronger than what he could with just a 110% completion rate mana body. Thanks to this improvement, all mana that entered his mana domain was subject to his control. Autumn Plant's attempt to bind him with a Tier 4 binding spell that hadn't even reached a 100% completion rate was a complete and utter joke. Rather than relying on such a spell, Autumn Plant would be more effective if he tried to attack Feng with his staff. What do you mean? Feng's words confused Autumn Plant. A spell's performance was indeed dependent on the quality of its mana, and of its target's mana. However, he was currently a Tier 4 Great Wizard. The spell he used was also at the Tier 4 standard. How could his spell not have any effect against a player of the same tier? What do I mean? Feng shook his head in disappointment. He had already given Autumn Plant a clear explanation, yet the latter still failed to understand the cause of his failure. Alright then. I'll just let you feel it yourself. As soon as Feng finished speaking, a ripple of mana spread out from his body. The space within a 1,000-yard radius of Feng darkened. When looking at this darkened region from a distance, one would even see space within this region warping. Caught within Feng's mana domain, Autumn Plant suddenly felt his mind turning sluggish. He also felt as if his body had fallen into a mire, as the ambient mana had undergone a complete change. At this point, the mana around him couldn't even be considered mana. Unlike normal mana, this mana felt dark, murky, and silent. Surrounded by this mana, Autumn Plant very nearly retched in disgust, his complexion turning incomparably pale. No. This is impossible. How can you have such mana? When Autumn Plant looked at Feng now, his eyes were filled with fear and madness. He simply couldn't fathom how there could be such a person in this world. Meanwhile, upon seeing Autumn Plant rambling on like a lunatic while looking at Feng, Inkfeather immediately contacted him. Autumn, what happened on your side? Inkfeather stared at Autumn Plant's crazed behavior in confusion. Do you need our help? Autumn Plant had clearly been normal just a second ago. However, as soon as the dark space appeared, he began behaving abnormally. No. Run. Run quickly. Autumn Plant urged frantically when he received Inkfeather's call. He's not human. He's not human at all. Not human? What do you mean? Inkfeather grew even more confused at Autumn Plant's words. His mana is too terrifying. We are absolutely no match for him. Autumn Plant exclaimed with a horrified expression. You need to escape quickly. Immediately notify the commander, and have him contact Secret Hand. Only Secret Hand can go up against him. Notify Secret Hand? Is there a need to go that far? At this point, Inkfeather suspected that something was wrong with Autumn Plant's mental state. Their opponent was only a Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Even if Feng was indeed the first player to reach Tier 4, there shouldn't be any need to seek help from the Secret Hand Association, the largest NPC force based on Dragonheart Island. After all, Warblood still had plenty of trump cards in reserve. Even if they couldn't get rid of Feng shouldn't think of breaking out of the sea prison. Hostile players caught inside the sea prison would have their stamina and concentration drained rapidly. Even a Tier 4 player wouldn't last more than 10 minutes within it. And if a player's stamina and concentration zeroed out, they wouldn't be able to move their body at all. They might even die outright. Hence, even if their team was no match for Feng in a frontal confrontation, they could still whittle him to death inside the sea prison. When Inkfeather showed no intention of listening to his words, Autumn Plant felt like he was about to go crazy. No. Listen to me. You don't know just how P-11 before Autumn Plant could say anything more. Feng finally took action. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. The swordsman unsheathed the abyssal blade, raised the magic weapon slightly, and executed a vertical slash at the space in front of him. First sword light shadow. Suddenly, an illusory greatsword several hundred meters long appeared in the sky and fell toward Autumn Plant, leaving a dark void that divided the world into two in its wake. Before anyone could react, the sea prison trapping Feng's group split in half, and a massive void spanning over 1,000 yards opened up in the ocean. Seawater then flooded into the dark void, creating spectacular waterfalls. Surging waves carried the nearby ships toward this spatial tear, and the ships that fell into the void had their crews instantly vaporized. The 1,000-plus Warblood members maintaining the sea prison's magic array spat out blood on the spot, and fell into a mentally weakened state. It was evident that they had suffered a severe backlash from the barriers breaking. Meanwhile, a dark void had replaced the area Autumn Plant originally occupied. As for Autumn Plant himself, he was nowhere in sight. Chapter 2798. Another Tier 4. No. This is impossible. Inkfeather and the other Warblood members were thunderstruck by the scene before them. The sea prison was an ancient magic array capable of trapping even superior mythic monsters, yet it had shattered from just one attack. Moreover, this same attack had also annihilated Autumn Plant, a Tier 4 Great Wizard. How could they possibly believe this? Feng and Autumn Plant were both Tier 4 players, so how could there be such a huge disparity between them? Not to mention, Feng had executed his attack while under the sea prison's suppression. Even if Autumn Plant truly wasn't a match for Feng, he shouldn't be utterly powerless to resist the attack. Nevertheless, let alone putting up a fight, Autumn Plant couldn't even escape. Divine Shadow and the other Heaven's Blade members also couldn't help gaping in shock at this scene. After watching Feng's heaven-splitting slash, they finally understood the true strength of Tier 4 existences, and why God's Domain's NPCs would behave so fearfully and respectfully toward Tier 4 existences. Feng had transformed the terrain with just one attack. If a full-blown fight ensued between two Tier 4 existences, the effect the fight would have on the surroundings would be unimaginable. Vice Commander, what should we do now? The sea prison is already broken, and Vice Commander Autumn has been killed. I'm afraid that a level 122, Tier 3 assassin asked worriedly as he looked at Ink Feather. Have everyone retreat. Ink Feather said, gritting her teeth. Also, notify the commander of everything that happened here. Black Flame is no longer someone we can handle. We need Secret Hand's assistance. Understood. The Tier 3 assassin breathed out a sigh of relief when he heard Ink Feather's words. If they were to fight Feng, they would die without question. Subsequently, Warblood's members frantically retreated to Dragonheart Island, many of them even using Tier 3 instantaneous movement scrolls or other life-saving scrolls. Their reaction was because they knew very clearly just how terrifying a Tier 4 player could be. While more than 3,000 yards might separate them from Feng right now, the swordsman could probably close the distance in just a few seconds if he flew at full speed. Black Flame. Warblood will remember this transgression. We will be waiting for you on Dragonheart Island. Ink Feather bellowed. With Feng's group rapidly approaching, she promptly activated her Tier 3 instantaneous movement scroll and disappeared, abandoning the bound Heaven's Blades members. 2 seconds after Ink Feather disappeared, Feng's group of 4 arrived before Divine Shadow and the others. Those people were so arrogant before, yet they ran away even faster than rabbits. Solitary 9 burst into laughter when he saw that none of Warblood's Tier 3 experts remained in the vicinity. In response, Lifeless Thorn also laughed and said, "It's normal. They know that they'll just die even if they stay behind. After all, even their sole Tier 4 expert died, so Tier 3 players like themselves wouldn't be able to do anything." The strength Feng displayed was truly astonishing. Let alone Warblood's members, even Lifeless Thorn himself was shocked. During the fight with the infant golden dragon, Feng had forcibly cancelled his summoning. The backlash had drastically reduced both his concentration and basic attributes throughout the raid. And although he had activated a berserk skill near the end of the raid, the skill only allowed him to just barely participate in the fight. Hence, one could say that Feng had never exerted his normal strength in the entire infant dragon raid. However, when Feng went up against Autumn Plant, he had already fully recovered. Only, Lifeless Thorn had never imagined that Feng had already become so strong. Now Lifeless Thorn wouldn't find it strange if Feng could go toe-to-toe against a superior mythic monster. After all, the attack Feng executed earlier was simply astonishing. It definitely carried power at the Tier 5 standard. Guild Leader Black Flame, I am Vice Commander Divine Shadow of the Heaven's Blade Adventurer team. I really have to thank you for your help this time. If not for you, we would have definitely been imprisoned by Warblood for 15 days. Divine Shadow, who had been freed from his restraints, hurriedly stepped forward to thank Feng. At this moment, the only feeling in his heart was a deep sense of awe. In the past, Divine Shadow only considered Feng a local tyrant who had better luck than others. In his opinion, so long as he got promoted to Tier 4, he wouldn't be inferior to Feng in any way. However, Divine Shadow now found his previous thoughts laughable. After all, in terms of strength, Feng and he were like the sun and a candle. Even if he really managed to get promoted to Tier 4, he doubted he could last a single move against Feng. As for Cleansing Flame, when she looked at Feng, complicated emotions momentarily filled her heart. Previously, it was only thanks to Feng's help that Heaven's Blade had managed to survive the existential threat it faced. Originally, she thought that with the significant improvements she made during this period, she had shortened the gap between herself and Feng. However, it seemed that the gap between them had widened even further instead. In fact, Feng had become so strong that she could no longer grasp just how powerful he was exactly. It's nothing. I just happened to pass by, Feng said, chuckling as he looked at Divine Shadow. Team leader Yu Luo and I were trapped in the same place for some time. After we left that place, we appeared near Dragonheart Island. Can you tell me what Dragonheart Island's present situation is like? Although the World Stone allowed him to log in and out of God's domain anytime he wanted, he had not logged off for several consecutive days because he had focused on grinding for levels. Meanwhile, God's domain was a game that was constantly changing. Several days was more than enough time for significant changes to sweep through the entire God's domain, let alone a small area like Dragonheart Island. Dragonheart Island was a location he had paid constant attention to as well as one of Zero Wing's development focuses. The World Tower on Dragonheart Island was incredibly special. Even Tier 5 players could benefit from it because there were plenty of ancient ruins hidden inside. In addition, once communication between the two main continents of God's domain increased in frequency, Dragonheart Island would become an important trade hub. Hence, he had established roots on Dragonheart Island a long time ago. However, due to the many matters he had to deal with on the eastern continent, he had no choice but to leave Dragonheart Island's matters to someone else. As a result, Zero Wing had never been able to develop properly on Dragonheart Island. Now that his strength had undergone a qualitative transformation, and he also possessed massive wealth, he would naturally have to write Zero Wing's development on Dragonheart Island into his agenda. After all, Dragonheart Island had plenty of rare and precious resources. In fact, the rare basic materials that he needed for the construction of the small mobile fortress could all be found on the island. This was also one of the reasons why he had decided to head to Dragonheart Island directly. I see. Realization dawned upon Divine Shadow when he heard Feng's words. He now roughly understood why Yu Luo was with Feng's party. He then shook his head and sighed. Guild leader Black Flame, Dragonheart Island has already become Warblood's private playground. Outside forces are unable to interfere with Dragonheart Island's affairs at all. Even Heaven's Blade has been forced to disband because of Warblood. Is it because of an NPC force? Feng asked. Somehow, Blood Oath actually managed to partner up with the Secret Hand Association, Dragonheart Island's strongest NPC force. Because of this, even Dragonheart Island's local superpowers have to abide by Warblood's will to avoid getting targeted. Divine Shadow answered, his heart brimming with hatred toward Warblood. If not for the Secret Hand Association, Warblood couldn't have forced Heaven's Blade to disband no matter what. Even if Warblood had Autumn Plant, it would still be incredibly difficult for one Tier 4 player to deal with the entirety of Heaven's Blade inside the vast World Tower. Naturally, it was also impossible for one Tier 4 Great Wizard to besiege a fortress. However, it was a different story for NPC forces. Even the weakest NPC force operating on Dragonheart Island had several Tier 4 NPCs under its command, what more the Secret Hand Association. According to the information Heaven's Blade found, the Secret Hand Association had as many as 14 Tier 4 NPCs. Moreover, some of these Tier 4 NPCs even held considerably high positions in Dragonheart City. Hence, it was a piece of cake for the Secret Hand Association to deal with a player force like Heaven's Blade in Dragonheart City. Most importantly, after the system's major update, NPCs no longer had any restrictions placed on them. While NPCs might still hesitate to take action inside an NPC city, once outside the city, NPCs could freely attack players. Therefore, any player force that dared to oppose Warblood would have their members hunted by the Secret Hand Association outside Dragonheart City. However, getting hunted and killed by the Secret Hand Association's NPCs still wasn't the worst part. In fact, getting killed would have been preferable. After all, these NPCs could actually imprison players for up to 15 natural days. Let alone Tier 3 peak experts. Even Tier 3 Apex experts couldn't afford such a penalty. I see. No wonder Warblood dares to be so arrogant. After hearing Divine Shadow's explanation, Feng more or less understood his frustration. Even in his previous life, such occurrences had been prevalent after God's Domain's first major update. Now that most players had yet to reach even Tier 3, they would find it even more impossible to oppose NPC forces. Guild Leader Black Flame, now that you've killed Autumn Plant, I'm certain Ink Feather will relay this matter to Blood Oath. Since they know they're no match for you, they will definitely contact Secret Hand. However, Secret Hand should take some time to react. Hence, my suggestion is that we leave Dragonheart Island's vicinity during this time. That way, those NPCs won't be able to do anything against us. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Although the Secret Hand Association was powerful, so long as they left the association's sphere of influence, the association's NPCs would most likely stop pursuing them. At worst, they would no longer be able to mingle on Dragonheart Island. However, God's Domain was a massive world. They could easily head to other locations to grind for levels. It wouldn't be too late for them to seek payback once they raised their strength. No. I won't be leaving with you. I still have some matters I need to deal with on Dragonheart Island, Feng said, shaking his head. Smiling, he continued. Moreover, I have a debt to collect from War Blood. After Feng finished speaking, Yuluo added in a determined tone. That's right. I'm also going to Dragonheart Island to meet with the commander. I will definitely make War Blood pay. Divine Shadow couldn't help growing anxious at Yuluo's words. They had gone to great lengths to escape from Dragonheart Island. If Yuluo were to head to Dragonheart Island now, it would be a one-way trip. Yuluo, stop fooling around. Guild Leader Black Flame is a Tier 4 player, so he might not have any problems, but you are. An astonishing aura suddenly burst forth from Yuluo's body, interrupting Divine Shadow and subjecting him and the others to powerful pressure. The aura Yuluo released was even more frightening than Autumn Plant's. Divine Shadow was dumbfounded when he sensed Yuluo's aura. Only after a long time did he manage to ask, "You've reached Tier 4? Chapter 2799. Returning to Dragonheart City in response to Divine Shadow's question, Yuluo faintly smiled and nodded. I was lucky to get promoted, thanks to Guild Leader Black Flame. Despite Yuluo's humble response, her affirmation still dumbfounded Divine Shadow. However, the life aura Yuluo radiated couldn't be faked. Basic attributes couldn't make up for the difference in life rating he sensed. Team Leader Yuluo, you're amazing. Cleansing Flame was similarly stunned by the revelation. After snapping out of her daze, she exclaimed joyfully, "Now that you've gotten promoted to Tier 4, that makes you Dragonheart Island's second Tier 4 expert. If the commander finds out about this, she'll definitely be tickled pink." The current era no longer belonged to Tier 3 players, but to Tier 4 players. So long as a power gained a Tier 4 player, it would receive a significant boost to its status and authority, and even NPC forces would not dare offend it recklessly. When Divine Shadow remained in a daze even after a long time had passed, Yuluo smiled and prompted, "Vice Commander Shadow, may I return to Dragonheart City together with Guild Leader Black Flame now? You are now a Tier 4 player, so I naturally can't stop you." "There is also no need to stop you," Divine Shadow replied, sighing. He never thought that after not seeing each other for only a month, Yuluo would have already grown into an existence he had to look up to. He then continued, "However, I will return with you. Things on Dragonheart Island have changed significantly after the major update. You can avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble if you have me guiding you." "Vice Commander, I'll go with you too. Currently, after the Commander, I have the highest status in Dragonheart City out of everyone in Heaven's Blade. With me around, those NPCs shouldn't make too much trouble for us," Cleansing Flame volunteered. "Status? Trouble?" Yuluo was confused by Cleansing Flame's words. Since when did players require a certain degree of status to enter Dragonheart City? On the other hand, Feng understood what Cleansing Flame meant. After the system's first major update, aside from NPCs becoming the majority in God's Domain, NPCs would also start behaving more realistically. This was especially true for the various NPC forces. Although NPC forces were powerful, most of them still operated under the banner of specific kingdoms, empires, or neutral cities like Dragonheart City. Hence, ostensibly, these NPC forces wouldn't dare mess around with players in NPC cities. However, that did not stop these NPC forces from abusing their positions to harass player forces. One example would be imposing pointless inspections on players trying to enter or exit the city, which wasted their time. Hence, a player's status in NPC cities became very important. However, the status mentioned here was different from the noble ranks players gained. Having status in an NPC city meant obtaining a position carrying actual power in the city. As for the noble ranks players gained previously, they were merely empty titles after the major update took place. Noble ranks no longer granted players actual power in an NPC city, only benefits such as the ability to recruit personal guards. Take Feng's visit to the Twin Towers Kingdom's capital city, for example. The way the senior administrator of the city hall there referred to him was completely different from how most NPCs referred to him before the major update. The senior administrator hadn't addressed Feng with honorifics such as Bronze Legatee, Lord Earl, etc. Instead, the NPC merely addressed him as Sir. Only after Feng had taken out the War Gods Temple's certification did the NPC change his address to Lord Guild Leader. This was because he was the guild leader of a guild the War Gods Temple recognized officially. In NPC cities, his status was roughly equivalent to the deputy city lords. Without the War Gods Temple's certification, though Feng would merely be an insignificant existence to the senior administrator. Of course, had Feng revealed his Tier 4 ranking, he would similarly receive different treatment. Only, compared to that of players holding actual positions of power, his treatment would still be slightly inferior. After all, no individual Tier 4 player would dare cause a ruckus in an NPC city unless they were tired of living. Hence, so long as an NPC wasn't an adventurer that frequently operated out in the fields, they wouldn't fear Tier 4 players at all. Alright, you can come with us. Divine Shadow couldn't help feeling a little helpless as he looked at Cleansing Flame. However, what she had said was also true. Previously, if not for Cleansing Flame holding the position of a squadron captain in Dragonheart City's Dragonheart Knight Legion, they would have had trouble even stepping out of the city's entrance, let alone escaping Dragonheart Island. Afterward, Divine Shadow secretly led Feng's group back to Dragonheart City. As for the other Heaven's Blade members, they used this opportunity to depart from Dragonheart Island's vicinity quickly to avoid the Secret Hand Association's pursuit. Dragonheart Island, Dragonheart City. Due to the system's major update, Dragonheart City had become much livelier. Now, NPCs of foreign races were everywhere in the city's port, and previously scarce Tier 3 NPCs crowded the port. Most of these NPCs were at level 130, with some even reaching level 150. They were practically comparable to the Tier 3 NPC guards of Dragonheart City. Meanwhile, Dragonheart City's player population had also increased significantly. This was especially true of Tier 3 independent experts. Roughly 30% of the Tier 3 independent experts operating in the major sea zones surrounding Dragonheart Island gathered here. As for the reason, firstly, Dragonheart City's trade market was much more prosperous than other locations. Here, one could purchase many items that normally couldn't be found in the outside world. For example, Dragonheart City's auction house sold epic weapons and equipment usable by players. The only problem was that the currency used here was not the standard coins, but ancient coins. Secondly, the World Tower's 4th underground floor had Tier 4 legacy lands. Moreover, aside from independent experts, many of God's Domain's superpowers had also dispatched their members to develop on Dragonheart Island. Because of this situation, Dragonheart City most likely housed the largest number of Tier 3 players out of the various cities in God's Domain. This was also one of the reasons why Feng decided to visit Dragonheart City in person. However, before Feng and the others could enter Dragonheart City, they came across Ink Feather once more. At this time, Ink Feather and several hundred other War Blood members were carefully inspecting the players trying to enter the city. Even Blood Oath was standing by the entrance and quietly observing the moving crowd. His appearance at the entrance garnered a lot of attention from the surrounding players. What's going on? Why is Blood Oath here? I heard that someone killed one of Warblood's executives in the nearby waters. Blood Oath must have come to deal with those offenders personally. Crap! Who's the daring bastard that killed Warblood's members? The players began a quiet discussion among themselves as they looked at Blood Oath. They admired the person who dared kill Warblood's executive. After all, even the superpowers had to behave themselves around Warblood on Dragonheart Island. Otherwise, they would meet a tragic end. A single death definitely wouldn't be enough to compensate for the offense of killing one of Warblood's executives near Dragonheart Island. Hush! Keep your voice down. Don't you see that man beside Blood Oath? A level 122, Tier 3 ranger said, berating his guildmates. Pointing at a stalwart man clad in silvery knight armor standing beside Blood Oath, the ranger said, "That person is Sabrid, one of the Secret Hand Association's Tier 4 NPCs. He is also one of the vice-commanders of the city's Knight Legion. If he hears you, you'll be locked up for several days." Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU at the ranger's warning, his party members promptly stopped speaking. The name Sabrid was one they were very familiar with. This NPC was precisely why the various superpowers seeking to establish roots on Dragonheart Island had suffered severe losses. These foreign superpowers had many of their Tier 3 experts caught and jailed in Dragonheart City's prison for 3 days. The reason for their imprisonment was that they had offended Sabrid. Damn it. Blood Oath actually managed to get Sabrid here in such a short time. Divine Shadow's complexion darkened when he saw the knight standing beside Blood Oath. That Sabrid will definitely cause all sorts of problems for us to prevent us from entering the city. And so long as we show even the slightest sign of aggression, he'll abuse his authority to have guards capture us. Before Divine Shadow could finish explaining, Blood Oath noticed Feng's group, and a sly smile appeared on his face. "Lord Sabrid, I found those troublemakers," Blood Oath said to Sabrid as he pointed at Feng's group. "It's those people. That man standing in the lead even let Heaven's Blade's remnants get away, disrupting Warblood's expansion plans completely." "Is that so?" Sabrid, who looked to be in his early 40s, looked at the location Blood Oath indicated. Narrowing his eyes, he said to the soldier standing beside him, "Bring them to me. If they resist, you know what to do, right?" "Leave it to us, Vice Commander." The level 150, Tier 3 soldier smiled and nodded. He then led a team of around a dozen guards and approached Feng's group. Chapter 2800, Silent Entrance. Upon seeing the squad of NPC soldiers walk out of the entrance, the Warblood members standing by the gate looked at Feng's group triumphantly. The soldier squad consisted of 12 level 150, Tier 3 NPC soldiers. These NPCs were already close to 30 levels higher than the current average level of Tier 3 players in God's domain. In addition, these NPCs also possessed the identity of Dragonheart City's soldiers. After the major update, the NPC soldiers of NPC cities were no longer as rigid as before, enforcing all rules thoroughly and behaving impartially in their judgment. Instead, these NPC soldiers had become humanized, bending the rules to their liking. They could be strict with some and lenient with others. Meanwhile, so long as their actions fell within the permissible range of the rules, players would be utterly helpless against them. Vice Commander Feather, let's see how Black Flame can continue acting arrogantly. Snowy Afterglow, who had reached level 123, said to Ink Feather as he watched the NPC soldiers approach Feng's group. "Even if he's Tier 4, he will still have to behave here. Black Flame isn't a simple person. If he can restrain his temper, with his status as a Tier 4 player, these soldiers won't dare make things too difficult for him," Ink Feather said, shaking her head. "Everything will depend on Black Flame's subsequent actions." Forbearance was a basic quality leaders of guilds possessed. As the guild leader of Zero Wing, Feng naturally possessed this quality too. If Feng decided to behave this time, the means they could use against him wouldn't be very effective. If they failed to exact their revenge on Feng now, the only thing they could do was ambush him outside Dragonheart Island. He has always been arrogant. "I doubt he'll tolerate this humiliation," Snowy Afterglow said. "Even if he can, so long as he dares show even a little bit of resistance or behave disrespectfully to Lord Sabrid, we'll be able to take care of him." "Let's hope so." Ink Feather also hoped that Feng would choose not to tolerate the NPC guards' harassment. That way, they would have an easy time dealing with him. While the soldiers were approaching Feng's group, the surrounding players who saw this scene couldn't help stopping to spectate the situation. What's the matter with these soldiers? They can actually leave the entrance on their own initiative? Wait, that assassin seems to be Divine Shadow, one of Heaven's Blade's vice-commanders. What? Heaven's Blade's members actually took the initiative to show themselves? Are they tired of living? The surrounding players recognized Divine Shadow in no time at all, and were astonished. After all, Warblood had long since placed a bounty on all of Heaven's Blade's members in Dragonheart City. By showing up at the city's entrance now, Heaven's Blade's members were basically throwing themselves into the jaws of death. Now that these NPC soldiers are going straight for them, they're seriously doomed. These NPCs are first-rate when it comes to making life difficult for others. They interrogated me for 2 whole hours the last time I came here. If I hadn't bribed them with a magic crystal, I would have most likely had to wait for a few more hours before I could enter the city. These soldiers are probably the Secret Hand Association's members as well. If Heaven's Blade's members get detained, it definitely won't end with just a few hours of interrogation. These soldiers will most likely corner them until they speak out in retaliation. And if they do that, they'll be jailed right away. Seeing the NPC soldiers taking the initiative to walk away from the entrance, the surrounding players looked at Feng's group in pity. However, none of them stepped forward to help. After all, it would be an express train to hell if they did so. While the surrounding players were discussing quietly among themselves, the 12 NPC soldiers had surrounded Feng's group. Dragonheart City is in chaos right now, so our superior has instructed us to tighten inspections to prevent people from making trouble in the city. Not only are you bunch acting suspiciously, but you are even concealing your identities with cloaks. Remove your cloaks and come with us, said the rough-looking guard heading the squad. Sneering, he added, rest assured, the interrogation will be over quickly. It'll only take around a dozen hours, so it won't delay you for too long. Oh right. Just in case, please open your spatial bags and let us inspect them. We cannot let you bring any prohibited items into the city. As soon as the head soldier finished speaking, the other guards began smiling as well. That's right. Hurry up and open your bags. Don't worry. We won't take any of your items. We'll only take a look at them. Right. It's just for an inspection. This is for Dragonheart City's safety. The several NPC soldiers laughed as they looked at Feng. Meanwhile, Divine Shadow's complexion turned ashen when he heard the soldiers' words. He had never imagined that the Secret Hand Association's NPCs would be so ruthless. A spatial bag was a player's greatest secret. Revealing the contents of a player's bag to other players would not only potentially attract trouble, but also expose their trump cards. Excuse me, but we don't plan on entering Dragonheart City, Divine Shadow said, rejecting the soldiers' demand outright. There was no way they could allow the soldiers to inspect their bags. This was especially true for Feng, the guild leader of Zero Wing. It was evident that these soldiers were trying to pick a fight with them. Now their only choice was to abandon their plan to enter Dragonheart City. However, the head soldier smiled when he heard Divine Shadow's refusal. It doesn't matter whether you enter the city or not. In fact, you bunch look even more suspicious now. So, there is an even greater need for you to be checked. You'd best open your spatial bags quick. Otherwise, my brothers and I will personally take action, the head soldier said, raising his hand. Immediately, the 11 other soldiers gripped their weapons and released their killing intent. However, as these soldiers gripped their weapons, Cleansing Flame stepped forward. She then took out a bronze token from her bag. I am Cleansing Flame, a captain of the Dragonheart Knight Legion. These people are my companions. I can prove that they have no problems, Cleansing Flame said. In a slightly annoyed tone, she continued. Moreover, you people from the City Defense Legion are responsible for maintaining order within the city, not outside. You are overstepping your boundaries. When Cleansing Flame took out her Dragonheart Knight token, Divine Shadow breathed out a sigh of relief, glad that he had brought her along. Otherwise, they would have gotten caught in the Secret Hand Association's trap. As Dragonheart City's trump card legion, the Dragonheart Knight Legion was far superior to the City Defense Knight Legion. Moreover, the City Defense Knight Legion did not have the authority to inspect members of the Dragonheart Knight Legion. The Dragonheart Knight Legion? Looking at Cleansing Flame, the head soldier smiled nonchalantly and said, "Since you are a member of the Dragonheart Knight Legion, we naturally have no right to inspect you. However, that is not the case for your companions. They are acting suspiciously and are even wearing cloaks. As Dragonheart City's first line of defense, we have a responsibility to maintain the city's safety. Hence, we cannot leave them be. They must be checked." "You." The soldier's words enraged Cleansing Flame. "I will report this to Commander Anos." "Go tell him then. I believe Commander Anos will understand our painstaking efforts," the head soldier said, smiling. "However, before that, your companions must undergo inspection. I will give you only 10 seconds to consider. If you don't open your bags yourselves, don't blame us for doing it for you." As the head soldier finished speaking, the other soldiers readied their weapons. It was evident that they did not plan on giving Feng's group any chance to escape. Meanwhile, when the surrounding players saw this scene, they gasped. How ruthless! Sure enough, nobody can afford to offend Warblood on Dragonheart Island. No wonder even the superpowers dare not disrespect Warblood on Dragonheart Island. Although many of the players present would normally suffer at the hands of these NPC soldiers, the soldiers would only put them through long hours of interrogation, at most. This was definitely the first time the players had seen these soldiers draw their weapons against players. Haha! Amazing! Amazing! As expected of Secret Hands members. I want to see what that black flame is going to do now. Snowy Afterglow burst into laughter when he saw this scene. I heard that Black Flame has many treasures on him. If we can get him to reveal those treasures, all our efforts this time would definitely be worthwhile. Ink Feather also nodded in agreement with Snowy Afterglow's words. In reality, even she did not think that the Secret Hand Association would be so ruthless. Now Feng was truly between a rock and a hard place. Whether he chose to anger the guards or reveal his spatial bag for everyone to see, he would still suffer in the end. Black Flame. Now, it's my turn to let you know what it feels like to live in misery. When Blood Oath saw the scene playing out before him, the smile on his face grew even brighter. Previously, when Feng had killed him during the Dragon Phoenix Pavilion's conference, Blood Oath's reputation had plummeted on Dragonheart Island. However, the tables had turned now. After partnering with the Secret Hand Association, Blood Oath had always hoped that Feng would come to Dragonheart Island. To ensure this happened, he had even had his subordinates provoke Zero Wing frequently. Now his chance for vengeance had arrived. This was also only the first step of Blood Oath's vengeance. Even if Feng agreed to the soldiers' demand, he still had plenty of things prepared for Feng afterward. It wouldn't matter even if Feng was a Tier 4 player. Dragonheart City was different from the average NPC city. In terms of combat power, Dragonheart City was even stronger than the capital cities of some empires. Moreover, as Dragonheart City was a neutral city, the identities and positions one held in kingdoms and cities did not matter here. Only Dragonheart City's identities and statuses. This was also why the various superpowers had no choice but to submit to Warblood. While everyone was secretly discussing the situation, Divine Shadow whispered to Feng, "I'm sorry for this situation, Guild Leader Black Flame. I'll hold them back afterward, so run away when you get the chance. These soldiers won't dare abandon their post, so as long as you leave Dragonheart Island's vicinity, they won't continue chasing you." Their only way out of this situation now was to flee. Confronting these NPC soldiers would only mean death for them. If they did that, they would be playing into Blood Oath's hands. Hence, Divine Shadow decided to exchange his own life for everyone else's freedom. "No, that won't be necessary," Feng said, shaking his head. "Leave the rest to me." Guild Leader Black Flame? Divine Shadow was a little confused as he looked at Feng. There was clearly no room for reconciliation between them and the NPC soldiers. Aside from escaping, he simply couldn't figure out how they could get out of this situation. At this moment, let alone Divine Shadow, Even Yu Luo found this situation strange. She couldn't understand what Feng could possibly do in this situation either. When the head soldier saw Feng stepping forward, he grinned and asked, "What? Have you made up your mind?" Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Yu Feng was the person Vice Commander Sabret had singled out. No matter what Feng's answer was, the head soldier would have ways to make things difficult for him. "Made up my mind?" Chuckling, Feng said. "Indeed, I have made up my mind." "Good." Nodding, the head soldier said. "Then open up your spatial bag." As soon as the head soldier finished speaking, Feng made his move. The next moment, a fleeting flash appeared before Feng, and the head soldier's body got bisected. The soldier's 20 million HP instantly fell to zero, the two halves of his body spraying blood all over the place as they fell to the ground. Chapter 2801. Combating a Tier 4 NPC. He killed the NPC? How dare he? Everyone present was taken aback when they saw the head soldier bisected. Even Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame had their mouths hanging wide open, neither of them having expected Feng to take action. Moreover, not only did Feng take action, but he had even directly killed an NPC soldier. This was simply, this guy is doomed. He's definitely dead. He actually killed one of Dragonheart City's NPC soldiers. This won't end with just a few weeks' imprisonment. Dragonheart City was a neutral city. Hence, its management was much stricter than that of NPC cities in kingdoms and empires. Before the major system update took place, players who killed another player or NPC within Dragonheart City would not only be killed on the spot, but also be prohibited from logging into the game for a month. And when they could log back into the game, they would lose 10 levels and have their souls placed into a weakened state for 10 days. This penalty would basically cripple a player's account. Now, not only did Feng commit murder after the system update, but the person he killed was even an NPC soldier. At this point, everyone no longer dared imagine what kind of punishment he would receive should he be killed or caught. Inkfeather and the other War Blood members standing by the entrance were caught off guard by Feng's actions. How much courage does he possess? Inkfeather couldn't believe her eyes as she took in Feng's casual appearance. Did he lose his mind? She had thought of the possibility of Feng resisting the NPC soldiers and escaping. However, the possibility of him killing an NPC soldier had never occurred to her. Yet, Feng had executed this feat so decisively. As for Blood Oath, when he saw this scene, he became ecstatic. Good. As expected of the first player to get promoted to Tier 4. Blood Oath sneered. Unfortunately, today will be the day you fall. However, before everyone could recover from the surprise of seeing Feng kill the head soldier, Feng brandished the abyssal blade once more. The next moment, a galaxy of stars appeared around Feng and enveloped the 11 NPC soldiers remaining of the squad. Sword's orbit. Damages exceeding 50 million appeared above the Tier 3 NPCs' heads one after another, the 11 NPC soldiers getting killed instantly. A bunch of useless fools. Do you think Dragonheart City's rules have any use against me? Feng said as he glanced at the fallen NPC soldiers indifferently. He then sheathed the abyssal blade casually as if he hadn't done anything to speak of. If it were before he had entered the ancient god's domain, he would still have to be wary of Dragonheart City's rules. However, he no longer had such worries now. At Feng's words, a deathly silence momentarily enveloped the surrounding area. He's nuts. He's definitely nuts. Who is this guy? He actually dares slaughter Dragonheart City's NPC soldiers? When the spectators saw Feng's actions, some felt crazed, some felt fearful, some felt excited, and some felt awed. One thing was for certain, though Feng's feat of killing 11 NPC soldiers in one go would be forever etched in their minds. Without a doubt, Feng was the most ruthless player in God's domain. The surrounding players became curious about Feng's identity. Meanwhile, when the silver-armored knight Sabret saw this scene, his eyes turned bloodshot, and the intensity of his aura skyrocketed. He no longer suppressed his aura, thoroughly displaying the power of a level 160, Tier 4 NPC. His aura was so overbearing that everyone nearby shuddered involuntarily. Outrageous. You dare lay hands on the City Defense Knight Legion? Don't even think of leaving this place alive today. Sabred bellowed as he leaped into the air. Simultaneously, the other NPC soldiers stationed at the entrance also took action, their numbers exceeding 100. We're really doomed this time. Divine Shadow despaired when he saw Sabred taking action. He couldn't understand why Feng had acted so rashly. Their group stood no chance against a level 160, Tier 4 NPC, even though Feng was Tier 4. After all, NPCs possessed not only higher basic attributes than players, but also superior mana control. Their weapons and equipment were likewise superior to those of players in general. However, while Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame were despairing over this matter, two voices of complaint entered their ears. Guild leader, you're too fast. That's right. You should have told us in advance if you were going to attack. At least give us some time to prepare. The next moment, both Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9 took out their weapons in frustration, evidently intending to fight these NPC soldiers. Have they lost their minds too? Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame were on the brink of mental collapse at this moment. Feng was famous for being an arrogant guild leader, so while his reaction was shocking, it was still within the realm of expectations. However, what was up with the two players following Feng? Yu Luo, though, did not appear surprised by Lifeless Thorn and Solitary 9's actions. She too grabbed her staff and said quietly to Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame, "Vice Commander Flame, wait behind us. I'll deal with the NPCs coming at us." BIL 11/B. At Yu Luo's words, Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame turned to the cleric in surprise and confusion. What had become of this world? Was this really the same Yu Luo they knew? Seeing the two's horrified eyes, Yu Luo smiled and consoled. "Don't worry. Nothing will happen. We're just dealing with a bunch of NPC soldiers." Out of everyone present, she reacted the calmest to Feng's actions. As she had reached Tier 4 herself, she understood quite well that Tier 4 powerhouses were no pushovers. Even the NPCs in the Ancient Gods domain didn't dare offend Tier 4 players. Yet these Tier 3 NPCs in the Modern Gods domain actually dared do so. They were simply tired of living. After all, even the Kings of Kingdoms dared not casually offend Tier 4 powerhouses. She had to admit that while some NPCs had grown smarter after gaining conscious thought, some had grown dumber as well. Either that or pushing around Tier 3 players had become a habit for these Tier 3 NPCs. And they now assumed that the existence known as players were pushovers that didn't know how to retaliate. The fact that players still had the mindset that NPCs shouldn't be provoked had most likely contributed to this misconception as well. However, after experiencing life in the Ancient Gods domain, Yu Luo understood very clearly that God's domain never had any absolute rules. The only absolutes were strength and status. In the Ancient Gods domain, instances of players killing NPCs occurred frequently. Even killing city lords wouldn't be a problem, so long as one could bear the consequences, and had the strength necessary to accomplish the feat. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU hence. She found it laughable that Warblood thought it could rule over Dragonheart City without fear just because it had gained the support of an NPC force. Warblood was utterly ignorant of the fact that after players reached Tier 4, they would be living in a completely different world from Tier 3 players. At this time, Sabred had already arrived in the air above Feng's group, and was looking at Feng with anger in his eyes. This was because even he hadn't expected that Feng would dare kill the soldiers. Furthermore, he would be held responsible for their deaths. Unable to hold back his anger, he bellowed, "Foolish heaven-blessed individual! Do you think nobody can punish you just because you've reached Tier 4? None of you will escape today." After saying so, Sabred unslung the snowy white greatsword he carried on his back, and executed a slash at Feng. A sword light shot at Feng, leaving behind a black tear in space that extended hundreds of yards away. The power of this attack could heavily injure even a mythic monster of the same level. Tier 4 skill Sky-Splitting Flash. Well said. Looking at Sabred's approaching attack, Feng said leisurely, "However, you provoked the wrong person." After saying so, Feng unsheathed the Light of Two Worlds and brandished it. Chapter 28:02. Power of Two Worlds Swords Orbit. Boom. When the two attacks collided, a powerful shockwave spread to several hundred yards away. Even the nearby Tier 3 expert stumbled a few steps back, while the Tier 2 players went flying several dozen yards. He blocked it. Who is he? The spectating players were stunned when they saw Feng still standing in his original position. Despite going up against a level 160, Tier 4 NPC's Tier 4 skill, Feng was actually an even match, emerging from the exchange unscathed. At this time, let alone the spectators, even Sabrid was surprised by this situation. Surprised? Looking at Sabrid's slightly bewildered expression, Feng smiled faintly and said, "It seems that the vice commander of Dragonheart City's City Defense Knight Legion only amounts to this much." However, despite saying such words, Feng dared not be careless around Sabrid. The Light of Two Worlds had indeed increased his basic attributes and the power of his sword-type skills significantly. Thanks to it and the several other fragmented legendary items he equipped, his basic attributes reached an astonishing level. Although he still wasn't a match for superior mythic monsters of the same level, he wasn't that far off either. However, Sabrid was at level 160, 20 levels higher than Feng. In terms of basic attributes, Feng definitely lost to Sabrid by a large margin. Hence, the only way he could beat the NPC was by relying on his powerful mana and superior combat techniques. "Boy, you are courting death." Sabrid grew even more enraged at Feng's words. Suddenly, the mana within a 1,000-yard radius began gathering around Sabrid in a frenzy. It was evident that the knight had not used his full strength for the previous attack. After the gathered mana reached a critical point, Sabrid instantly transformed into several dozen afterimages that surrounded Feng. The NPC was dazzlingly fast. Tier 4 skill Broken Shadow. At this time, even Feng couldn't tell which of these afterimages was the real Sabrid. It felt as if the NPC had truly split into several dozen clones of himself. Before Feng could react, fiery runes appeared on Sabrid's snowy white greatsword. The flames the runes gave off incinerating even space itself. Tier 4 taboo skill, Starfire Blade. The next moment, every one of Sabrid's afterimages executed a slash. Despite the Starfire Blade being effective for only one attack in reality, Sabrid had turned it into several dozen attacks. Amazing! As expected of a Knight Legion's vice commander, he actually managed to fuse his Tier 4 skills to such an extent. Feng couldn't help being in awe when he saw the several dozen attacks coming at him from all directions. Combining two skills was much more difficult than combining two spells. However, so long as one succeeded, one could dramatically increase the effectiveness of the skills. Disappear. Sabrid bellowed, the power that his weapon radiated skyrocketing even further. It was clear he had stopped holding back and planned to slay Feng. Seeing the several dozen space-tearing greatswords approaching him, Feng held up his sword horizontally before him. Tier 4 legacy skill Blade Domain. Immediately, 7 magic swords materialized around Feng. The magic swords then transformed into innumerable stars in his surroundings. Swords Orbit. Boom, boom, boom. A series of explosions and shockwaves blanketed the area in front of Dragonheart City's entrance. After several dozen clashes, the ground under Feng cracked, and the space around him shattered. His HP had fallen by more than 5 million as well, his HP bar falling by 1/3 of its capacity. He didn't die? Ink Feather's eyes widened in shock when she saw the amount of HP Feng lost, her mind refusing to believe this outcome. Sabrid was a level 160, Tier 4 NPC, moreover he was the vice commander of one of Dragonheart City's Knight Legions. His strength was above average even among Tier 4 NPCs. With his combination of a Tier 4 skill and a Tier 4 taboo skill, he could inflict significant damage on superior mythic monsters of the same level. Yet, Sabrid's attack had only taken 1/3 of Feng's HP. Amazing! The power of this fusion attack actually reaches the Tier 5 basic rank. After taking a look at his remaining HP, Feng felt even greater admiration for Sabrid. If he hadn't switched to the Light of Two Worlds, which raised all his sword-type skills by 1 level, he would have had to activate his Berserk skill to repulse Sabrid's fusion attack. However, activating his Berserk skill would also mean that he had been pushed to his limits, on the brink of death. After all, berserk skills weren't unique to players, NPCs had them as well. Boy, it seems you're quite sturdy. Sabred was inwardly astonished when he saw Feng still standing. He never imagined that a heaven-blessed individual could be so strong. However, this is the end for you. After saying so, Sabred raised his greatsword into the air. Immediately afterward, a dozen identical greatswords appeared around him, forming a magic array. Tier 4 skill, Blade's Shadow. Tier 4 taboo skill, Sealing Void. The next moment, the dozen greatswords transformed into black holes that shot toward Feng. Upon seeing the black holes spanning several dozen meters, the nearby spectators, both players and NPCs, fell into despair. This was because they could already foresee that once these black holes collided with the ground, the impact would vaporize everything within several hundred yards. Sure enough, Tier 4 NPCs are no pushovers. However, this still isn't enough to get rid of me. Feng smiled when he saw the descending black holes. Let's test this move on you. The next moment, Feng tightened his grip on the light of two worlds and poured half of his mana into the weapon. Suddenly, crimson divine runes lit up all over the sword, releasing a dazzling and mesmerizing brilliance. As this dazzling light bloomed, a deathly silence enveloped the world around Feng. Even time itself seemed to flow significantly slower. Subsequently, Feng swung the light of two worlds at Sabred. World Breaker. Boom. A strange light instantly penetrated the descending black holes like a hot knife through butter before landing on Sabred. When the strange light disappeared, time began flowing normally again. Meanwhile, the black holes in the sky had all disappeared. As for Sabred, he had lost over half his HP from the attack, retaining only around 200 million HP. Cracks had also appeared on the armor he wore, and fresh blood flowed out from all over his body. However, before Sabred could react, the slightly pale Feng had already arrived before the NPC. Not giving Sabred any time to catch his breath, Feng brandished the light of two worlds once more. Spatial Slash. Swords Transmigration. Although the fusion of skill and combat technique wasn't comparable to the fusion of skill and skill, the combination still increased the effectiveness of his skill significantly. The next moment, 6 sword lights tore through space and approached Sabred. Reacting quickly, Sabred held his greatsword horizontally before him and activated the Tier 4 defensive skill, Steel Fortress. The skill created a defensive barrier in front of him and increased his defense by 500% temporarily. 1 slash. 2 slashes. 3 slashes. Every one of Feng's attacks managed to slice through Sabred's defensive barrier without fail, but the barrier still bought Sabred enough time to defend against the attacks with his greatsword. Boom. 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 Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The next moment, explosions echoed throughout Dragonheart Island one after another. Simultaneously, Sabred's HP fell time after time. When the last sword light collided with Sabred's greatsword, the NPC got smashed into the ground at the speed of light, the impact creating a crater over a dozen meters deep. This last attack also zeroed Sabred's HP, and the knight passed away with a reluctant look on his face. Meanwhile, Feng, hovering in the air, saw his experience bar filling up rapidly. In no time at all, a golden glow enveloped him as his level rose from level 140 to level 141. However, nobody paid any attention to Feng at this time. Instead, everyone had their heads down as they gaped at Sabred's corpse lying in the crater. As if time had stopped moving, a deathly silence enveloped the entrance of Dragonheart City. Chapter 2803. God's Domain's Strongest. He died. A Tier 4 NPC died just like that? When the spectating players saw Sabred's dead body, they couldn't help doubting their eyes. Some of them even thought that the NPC was only playing dead and hadn't actually been killed. Blood Oath, standing by the entrance, also felt that the scene before him was fake. Sabred was the vice commander of one of Dragonheart City's powerful knight legions. He stood at the peak among Tier 4 existences. How could he possibly have been killed by a player? Of the spectating players present, the only ones who remained relatively calm at this situation were Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yuluo. They didn't find it particularly surprising that Feng had killed Sabrid. After all, Feng had already reached level 140. 4 Tier 4 existences, a 20-level gap wasn't much of a difference. However, the three of them had never imagined that Feng would be able to kill Sabrid so cleanly. The attack he used to injure Sabrid heavily was especially amazing. If not for that attack, the fight between the two would have lasted much longer. Unlike Lifeless Thorn's trio, Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame had their mouths fall wide open when they saw this scene. Their minds clearly failed to process what had just happened. While everyone was struggling to accept this scene, reality poured a bucket of cold water over them. The next moment, several items actually appeared around Sabrid's corpse. Of them, one was even the greatsword Sabrid used. The greatsword hovered in the air, radiating an unparalleled aura. Upon being subjected to this aura, many of the Tier 2 players felt an instinctive fear overwhelming their bodies. Only the Tier 3 players fared better. A fragmented legendary weapon. Nobody knew who shouted this sentence. However, it snapped everyone out of their daze, and they couldn't help ogling the snowy white weapon with glowing eyes. Some players even had the urge to charge forward and snatch it. However, before anyone could step forward, Feng had already arrived beside Sabrid's body. The aura he radiated scaring everyone into retreating. The pressure Feng gave off was simply too powerful. Even though he had already retracted his mana domain, everyone still felt stifled, none of them daring to look him in the eye. As for the fragmented legendary weapon, none of the players present dared entertain any thoughts of it now. After all, Feng had just killed a level 160, Tier 4 NPC. A single thought from him was probably more than enough to kill players like themselves. For a time, the tens of thousands of players and NPCs standing in the vicinity quietly watched Feng collect the items Sabrid dropped one after another. If I can become like him one day, my life would be complete. Let alone becoming like him, I can most likely walk around Dragonheart Island fearlessly with even half of his strength. As the adventurer team players spectating the fight from the distant port watched Feng collect Sabrid's loot, a sense of yearning and admiration awoke in their hearts. They also grew excited beyond words. The fact that Feng had managed to slay a Tier 4 NPC right in front of Dragonheart City, a large neutral city, definitely made him God's domain's strongest player. In fact, most likely, nobody would believe them even if they described the scene to others. Nonetheless, they had managed to witness this miraculous feat. How could their blood not boil in this situation? However, amid everyone's excitement, Feng suddenly disappeared. Before anyone realized it, Feng had already reappeared in front of Bloodoath, catching Bloodoath and the three peak experts protecting him off guard. "Commander Bloodoath, we meet again," Feng said with a faint smile. "I'm sure you know why I came here." Although Feng spoke in a calm tone and was even smiling, Bloodoath and the others paled as if they had just seen a ghost. "Black Flame, you'd best not mess around." Doing his best to calm his anxious heart, Bloodoath glared at Feng and added in a low tone, "This is already inside Dragonheart City. Moreover, now that you've killed Sabrid, neither Dragonheart City nor Secret Hand will spare you. If you know what's good for you, you'd best leave now. You'll be dead once the City Lord or the City Defense Legion's commander arrives." On Dragonheart Island, players would suffer entirely different penalties depending on whether they had fought inside or outside Dragonheart City. The fight with Sabrid had been outside the city. Hence, even though Feng had killed Sabrid, the penalty he would suffer wouldn't be particularly severe. After all, the area outside the city wasn't subject to the city's protections. Even if a fight took place right outside the city's entrance, the city's NPC soldiers would, at most, move to stop the fight. They wouldn't detain the offenders at all. This was also why Sabrid and the other NPC soldiers dared take the initiative to persecute Feng's group before. However, Bloodoath's current position was inside Dragonheart City. If Feng killed him now, the severity of his crimes would be on a whole other level. "Is that so?" Smiling, Feng unsheathed the abyssal blade and brandished it. 3 sword lights shot out from his weapon, and instantly plundered the lives of the 3 peak experts standing around Bloodoath. Even when their bodies hit the ground, none of the 3 had realized what had happened. Feng then turned to Bloodoath and asked, What about now? You. How dare you? Blood Oath was thunderstruck when he saw his 3 subordinates killed. Everyone else in the vicinity also saw this scene without missing a detail. Crap. Awesome. This is awesome. Black Flame. He must be Black Flame, right? He actually killed 3 of Warblood's peak experts right in front of Blood Oath. And Blood Oath doesn't even dare make any strange moves. Am I dreaming? Everyone felt their blood boil with excitement when they looked at Blood Oath, who dared not move a muscle in front of Feng. Their worship of Feng rose to a whole new level. Blood Oath was known throughout God's domain. After all, he was a big shot that even the superpowers had to submit to on Dragonheart Island, an existence standing at the peak of Dragonheart Island. Nonetheless, Blood Oath looked no different from an ant in front of Feng. This situation was simply crazy. It was so crazy that they couldn't even react to it. However, shortly after the crowd began bubbling with excitement, 3 figures suddenly descended from the sky and landed at the entrance. Every one of these figures exuded an aura much stronger than that of Sabrid. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Upon seeing these figures, Blood Oath reacted as if he had seen his savior. He looked at Feng and laughed. Black Flame, you are finished. Now that the Vice City Lord and 2 Knight Commanders have arrived, you shouldn't even think of leaving this place alive. One of the 3 new arrivals was none other than Cruz, Dragonheart City's Vice City Lord. He was a level 180 Tier 4 Great Wizard, a big shot standing at the top of God's domain. According to rumors, he was only half a step away from Tier 5, and could even contend against demon princes of the same level. As for the 2 other figures, one of them was Sharaviria, the commander of the Holy Star Knight Legion, and one of the World Tower's protectors. She was a bona fide level 200, Tier 5 Great Holy Knight. The last person was Landrek, the commander of the City Defense Knight Legion. He was a level 180, Tier 4 Sword Emperor. Although he was the weakest among the group of 3, he was still significantly stronger than Sabrid. This was because Landrek owned Earth and Glory, a genuine legendary spear. With this weapon, he was fully capable of contending with Tier 5 existences of the same level. With these 3 NPCs around, even a Tier 5 player wouldn't be able to escape. Chapter 2804, Difference in Status. Why did all these big shots show up? The players present gasped when they saw Cruz, Sharaviria, and Landrek at the entrance. They never thought that Feng's fight would attract so many NPC powerhouses. After all, players normally couldn't meet even one of these big shots. Nevertheless, 3 of them now appeared. Protector Sharaviria, in particular, was one of the apex powerhouses of God's domain. In the absence of Tier 6 gods, she would be part of the strongest group of existences. This was because not only was Sharaviria a Tier 5 NPC, but she even owned 2 legendary items: the Galaxy Sword and Bulwark of Light. She had slain dozens of demon kings, elven royalty, and void demons before. Even if a Tier 5 player existed now, they would simply be seeking death if they tried challenging her. The next moment, Blood Oath walked up to Vice City Lord Cruz's side quickly, then pointed at Feng and said respectfully, "Lord Vice City Lord, not only did this ruffian kill Vice Commander Sabrid, but he even killed my companions inside the city. You must punish this ruffian and protect Dragonheart City's order." Blood Oath spoke in a sonorous and powerful voice, his words echoing throughout the entrance. It sounded as if he was pronouncing the death sentence on Feng. Upon seeing the arrival of the 3 NPCs, Inkfeather breathed out a deep sigh of relief. When she looked at Feng again, a hint of glee appeared in her eyes. "Let's see how you get out of this situation." When the other players present saw this scene, they couldn't help shaking their heads dejectedly. With 3 of Dragonheart City's NPC powerhouses here, it was most likely impossible for Feng to escape with his life. Just when everyone thought another battle would break out, Cruz, the white-bearded old man standing beside Blood Oath, spoke up. "A dragon slayer. I never thought I would get to see one in my lifetime, and such a young one at that," Cruz said, a faint smile appearing on his face. "It seems times are changing." The Vice City Lord's words rendered everyone present stunned and confused. What dragon slayer? Blood Oath was similarly stunned by Cruz's words. He couldn't figure out what the Vice City Lord was getting at. Instead of punishing Feng as soon as possible, the NPC brought up the topic of Dragon Slayer out of nowhere. Just what was this NPC trying to do? You overpraise me, Lord Vice City Lord. Turning to look at Cruz, Feng said, My friends and I just got lucky to slay a dragon that had yet to enter adulthood. No. A dragon is a dragon. Your accomplishment of slaying a Tier 4 infant dragon while being at Tier 4 yourself is something even Lady Sharon never achieved, Cruz countered, shaking his head. If not for you, Lady Shara wouldn't have left the World Tower to come here in person. Cruz's words left Blood Oath dumbfounded. Sharaviria actually came here not because Feng had killed Sabrid but merely to take a look at Feng? At this time, let alone Blood Oath, most of the other players nearby were stupefied as well. What was going on with this situation? When Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame saw this scene, they were at a complete loss for words. They felt as if they were living in a completely different world from Feng. Not only had Feng killed the City Defense Legion's vice commander, but he also had subsequently killed 3 of Warblood's peak experts inside the city. Nevertheless, Dragonheart City's Vice City Lord was chatting with him as if none of these offenses had ever occurred. At this time, among the spectating players, only Lifeless Thorn, Solitary 9, and Yuluo knew why this was happening. The Dragon Slayer title wasn't just a title. It symbolized the accomplishment of a legendary feat in God's domain. With this title, no matter which NPC city one visited, one would enjoy a status close to that of the City Lord. For someone with such a status, killing a couple of provocateurs wouldn't be a problem at all. The only reason Sabrid had dared act rudely to Feng was his low standard, which prevented him from seeing through the Black Cloak's concealment effects. Otherwise, let alone provoking Feng, he wouldn't even have dared speak casually around Feng, knowing that Feng was a dragon slayer. After glancing at Lifeless Thorn and the other 2 Tier 4 players standing at a distance, Sharaviria turned to Feng and asked softly, Young Dragon Slayer, are you and your companions willing to serve as the Holy Star Legion's honorary knights? Honorary knights? The Holy Knight's words caught Feng slightly off guard. However, a moment later he replied without hesitation, It is our honor. In an NPC Knight Legion, the position of honorary knight was second only to the position of commander. In the absence of the commander, an honorary knight even had the authority to mobilize the legion. Moreover, despite not being bound to the Knight Legion, an honorary knight would still enjoy various privileges and benefits from the Knight Legion. Meanwhile, the Holy Star Knight Legion was the Knight Legion tasked with protecting the World Tower. Compared to other Knight Legions, one could gain even more benefits as an honorary knight of the Holy Star Knight Legion. In the past, countless Tier 4 and Tier 5 experts had sought to join the Holy Star Legion. However, due to the Legion's strict requirements, less than 10% of the Tier 4 experts had gotten chosen and become an official member of the Legion, let alone becoming an honorary knight. Hence, the fact that Sharaviria was offering to let them become honorary knights greatly exceeded Feng's expectations. Good. You are now members of the Holy Star Knight Legion. Fight to protect the rules of the World Tower. Sharaviria nodded approvingly as she looked at Feng. You can head to the World Tower to collect your honorary badge afterward. As soon as Sharaviria finished speaking, she vanished from everyone's sight. Blood Oath was dumbfounded by this situation. He never thought that Sharaviria had come here just to meet Feng. Moreover, she hadn't even mentioned a single word about Sabrid, as if Sabrid was merely an insignificant insect. Before Blood Oath could snap out of his daze, Vice City Lord Cruz walked up to Feng. Congratulations, young dragon slayer, Cruz said happily. It has been 50 years since Lady Shara last conferred the Holy Star Legion's honorary knight position to anyone. Even Commander Landrek is still challenging for that position. Upon seeing Cruz speaking with Feng so amicably, the surrounding players felt their worldviews fragmenting. They simply couldn't figure out what exactly Feng had done to garner the appreciation of these NPC powerhouses, so much so that they even ignored the killing of Sabrid, the City Defense Legion's vice commander. The next moment, just as Blood Oath was about to say something, Feng cut him off saying, Lord Cruz, when my companions and I were trying to enter the city before. This person here accused me of being suspicious and instigated Vice Commander Sabrid to provoke my group. May I know if it is possible to imprison him as punishment? Black Flame. You're slandering me. Blood Oath panicked at Feng's words. Hurriedly he explained. I have done no such thing. It was Lord Sabrid himself who decided to do so. The people around us can testify for me. At this time, Blood Oath already understood that Vice City Lord Cruz had no intention whatsoever of pursuing Feng for Sabrid's murder. Moreover, now that Feng had gained a very high position in Dragonheart City, if Blood Oath did not withdraw from this place immediately, he would definitely suffer. Do you mean that I, an honorary knight of the Holy Star Legion, am lying? Feng asked, smiling as he looked at Blood Oath. As soon as Feng finished speaking, Cruz nodded and looked at Blood Oath. He then said sternly, regardless of whether your words are true or false, you have slandered one of the Holy Star Legion's honorary knights. For this offense, you will be imprisoned for 15 days as punishment. No. This is unfair. He clearly attacked first. Blood Oath was startled by this turn of events. He never thought that Feng would play such a hand. However, it was useless to resist. Glaring at Feng, he bellowed. Black Flame, I'll make you pay for this. The Secret Hand Association won't let you off either. Get out of prison first, then talk. Smiling nonchalantly, Feng said, rest assured, once you get out, everything outside would have already ended. The Secret Hand Association indeed possessed a lot of Tier 4 NPCs. On the other hand, he was no pushover either. This was especially true now that he was an honorary knight of the Holy Star Knight Legion. The association would have to think twice before they tried anything against him. The Holy Star Knight Legion was both the manager and protector of the World Tower. The Secret Hand Association would be suicidal to attack him inside the World Tower. As for Dragonheart Island's surrounding sea zones, he rarely visited these areas normally. At most, he would be sailing by. Moreover, once the seal on Dragonheart Island was lifted, he could outright teleport to and from the island. Before Blood Oath could say anything more, a squad of level 160 soldiers came and escorted him away. How ruthless. Is this the status and influence Tier 4 powerhouses possess? Tier 4. I must get promoted to Tier 4. So this is Zero Wing's Black Flame? He's even more amazing than the rumors. I wonder if Zero Wing is recruiting Tier 2 players? If I can join such a guild, I won't have to worry about anything in Dragonheart City. When the surrounding players saw NPC soldiers bundling off Dragonheart Island's most feared man, they were taken aback by Feng's capabilities. They also understood why Feng had not killed Blood Oath outright. Compared to the penalty of dying once, the consequences of getting imprisoned for 15 days were much more severe. This was especially true now that Feng had gained such a high status in Dragonheart City. For him, 15 days was more than enough to bring down the War-Blood adventurer team. Meanwhile, all Blood Oath could do was watch as all of this happened. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. At this time, everyone present could already foresee Zero Wing standing at the peak of Dragonheart Island. Our problem has been resolved. After watching Blood Oath getting taken away, Feng returned to Divine Shadow and the others. Smiling, he said, we can enter Dragonheart City now. In response, Divine Shadow and Cleansing Flame nodded their heads stiffly. Even now, they still found it difficult to believe what had happened. Just a moment ago, War-Blood had been at the apex of its power. Yet, with only a few words from Feng, it now faced the threat of dissolution. Meanwhile, news of this situation spread like wildfire. In only a matter of minutes, it entered the ears of everyone in Dragonheart City. The news caused an especially large commotion among the city's various guilds and adventurer teams. Chapter 2805, Fame Shakes Dragonheart City. What did you say? Black Flame killed a Tier 4 NPC, and even got Blood Oath imprisoned for 15 days? When the various guilds and adventurer teams operating in Dragonheart City heard of Feng's miraculous feat, they were thunderstruck. They repeatedly pressed the reporting personnel for confirmation regarding the validity of this information. As if having expected such a reaction, The reporting personnel promptly sent a battle video of Feng killing Sabred to their respective superiors, as well as videos of Feng killing 3 of Warblood's peak experts right in front of Blood Oath and of NPC soldiers dragging Blood Oath off to prison. Dragonheart City, Bloodstone Bar. A group of level 123 plus, Tier 3 experts had gathered in this bar. Of the group, even the weakest person was at the Refinement Realm standard. There were also more than a dozen peak experts and 4 apex experts. Meanwhile, seated at the head of this group was none other than Elder Wu, one of 13 Thrones' founders. 1000, are you sure this information is correct? Elder Wu couldn't help feeling skeptical as he read the report from a woman shrouded in a layer of black mist. This was because 1000 Lives' report was simply too astonishing. After all, the reason their group was currently operating so secretively was Warblood. Nevertheless, Elder Wu was being told that Warblood was finished. Moreover, its destruction was due entirely to Zero Wing's guild leader, Black Flame. How could he possibly believe this? It is 100% true. Many powers already have designs on Warblood's territory. If not for Warblood still retaining some contact with Secret Hand, they would have most likely taken action already. 1000 Lives insisted in a determined tone. Moreover, according to the information I collected, Heaven's Blade appears to have formed a close relationship with Black Flame. If Zero Wing has Heaven's Blade's full support, I'm afraid it won't be long before Zero Wing occupies a significant portion of Dragonheart City's various resources. What is Black Flame thinking? He actually has the leisure to come to Dragonheart City? Is he not worried about the deteriorating situation over at the Twin Towers Kingdom? Elder Wu, who wore a somewhat haggard expression, was surprised by 1000 Lives' words. Simultaneously, he was confused as to how Feng had grown so terrifying this rapidly. The fact that Feng had killed a Tier 4 NPC without any repercussions and imprisoned Blood Oath with just a few words proved that he already stood at the top of Dragonheart City in terms of status. He was now in existence that Dragonheart City's various powers had to look up to. Yet according to Elder Wu's information, Zero Wing's operations over at the Twin Towers Kingdom were in dire straits. At this stage of the game, complete Tier 3 legacies were of utmost importance to the various superpowers. These legacies would allow them to go up against the NPC forces. Hence, over 20 superpowers were currently harassing Zero Wing's operations in the Twin Towers Kingdom with peak experts every day. While these superpowers were going up against the alliance of Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor at Sky Spring City, they had also dispatched many members to head to the Secret Covenant Tower from the neighboring NPC cities. To prevent these players from flooding into the Secret Covenant Tower, Zero Wing's alliance had stationed a large number of personnel on the routes to the tower. Thus far, battles between both sides involving over 100,000 players had already occurred 5 times, while battles involving several tens of thousands of players had occurred more than 20 times. In the most recent battle, Starlink and Miracle had even joined in the fray and dispatched a total of 4 Tier 4 experts. Fortunately, Zero Wing's side had dispatched 3 Tier 4 experts to counter. One of them was the commander of Zero Wing's main force, Fire Dance, one was Unyielding Soul's vice guild leader Unyielding Heart, and one was Crimson Emperor's vice guild leader Illusory Words. As for Black Flame, he was nowhere to be seen. In regard to this situation, everyone was confused as to why Black Flame sat out this battle. This battle had thoroughly shaken the entire God's Domain. It was the first one involving multiple Tier 4 experts since God's Domain's launch. By the end of this battle, a large portion of the glacial lake plain, where the conflict took place, had been reduced to a barren wasteland. Although the fight had ended in Zero Wing's victory, if not for Zero Wing's powerful war weapons, such as the Crimson Dragon flying ships, combat puppets, and advanced barriers, the outcome would have been different. Moreover, the increasing rampancy of NPC forces had forced the various superpowers to conserve a significant portion of their forces. However, Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor were no longer in a good state. The 3 guilds had suffered tremendous losses due to the protracted war. This was especially true for Zero Wing. After all, unlike Unyielding Soul and Crimson Emperor, Zero Wing had no background to rely on whatsoever. Knowing this, The various superpowers had also put in a lot of effort to whittle Zero Wing to death as quickly as possible. The actions the various superpowers took included poaching Zero Wing's experts and cutting off Zero Wing's income sources. Zero Wing's loss of income sources in the real world had put the guild in an especially difficult position. Most importantly, the various superpowers had also blocked Zero Wing's equipment and material sources. Although it wasn't a complete embargo, the various superpowers had jacked up the prices of equipment and materials to absurd levels. Now just producing a piece of level 120 mysterious iron equipment cost 30 gold coins. If it were before, 30 gold would already have been more than enough to produce a piece of level 120 secret silver equipment. In addition, the various superpowers also purchased all of the level 110 plus secret silver equipment and above from the market, leaving nothing for Zero Wing, Unyielding Soul, and Crimson Emperor. After the many battles fought, the equipment stockpile of the three guilds should already be bottoming out. Meanwhile, without good weapons and equipment, how were their members supposed to fight? A player fully equipped in secret silver equipment would have more than a 20% advantage in basic attributes over a player fully equipped in mysterious iron equipment. Needless to say, the gap with players fully equipped in fine gold equipment would be even greater. Moreover, without proper weapons and equipment, the three guilds members would also have more difficulty grinding in the secret Covenant Tower. At this time, Thousand Lives suddenly received a message from one of her subordinates. After reading it, she said, "I just received insider information from Warblood. It seems Black Flame's actions have affected even Secret Hand's control over the World Tower. So Secret Hand plans to teach Black Flame a lesson. However, since Secret Hand can't do anything against him on Dragonheart Island, it plans on partnering with Starlink to wipe out Zero Wing's forces in the Twin Towers Kingdom." Interesting. Black Flame really knows how to cause trouble. However, this is also a good opportunity for 13 thrones. A good opportunity? Thousand Lives parroted, confused by Elder Wu's words. Looking at Thousand Lives and the male ranger standing beside her, Elder Wu said, "Thousand Rain, you two follow me. Everyone else, continue resting here and wait for our return." "Yes, sir." Everyone responded respectfully. Afterward, Elder Wu secretly left the Bloodstone Bar together with Thousand Lives and Modern Rain. "Elder Wu, where are we going? Shouldn't we be heading to the 4th underground floor as planned?" Thousand Lives asked curiously as she looked at the pleasantly smiling Elder Wu. "We won't be going there for now. We have something more important to do," Elder Wu replied. "Something more important?" Having thought of something, Thousand Lives asked in surprise, "Are we going to partner with Zero Wing?" "Partner?" Shaking his head, Elder Wu said, "We don't need to partner with Zero Wing. We will just be giving Zero Wing an opportunity to defend the secret Covenant Tower." "Defend the secret Covenant Tower? How is that possible?" Thousand Lives couldn't help doubting Elder Wu's words. It might be fine if Starlink and the various superpowers were the only ones targeting Zero Wing. However, the situation was different now that the Secret Hand Association had joined the fray. At that time, who knew how many Tier 4 NPCs the association would send to deal with Zero Wing? With the forces Zero Wing currently had in the Twin Towers Kingdom, defending the secret Covenant Tower would be utterly impossible. Seeing Thousand Lives' doubt, Elder Wu smiled and asked, "But what if Zero Wing has a city-building order?" "Elder Wu, do you plan on selling that city-building order to Zero Wing?" Realization immediately dawned upon Thousand Lives. The city-building order was an incredibly rare item. Thus far, even 13 thrones had managed to acquire only 2. And as the guild had already used one of these 2 orders, it only had 1 left. With the city-building order, players could construct a guild city in any kingdom or empire they wished. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU. If Zero Wing could establish a guild city right beside the secret Covenant Tower, then its ability to control the tower would increase significantly. Combined with its Tier 4 combatants, Zero Wing would have a much better chance of defending the tower. Whether I sell it or not will depend on Zero Wing's sincerity," Elder Wu said, smiling. Upon hearing Elder Wu's words, Thousand Lives shook her head and smiled. At the same time, she also pitted Feng slightly. Since Elder Wu grasped Zero Wing's lifeline, he would definitely take a huge bite out of Zero Wing. This was especially true now that Feng stood at the apex of Dragonheart City. Elder Wu, according to our investigation, Black Flame is currently inside that wanderer's shop, Modern Rain said as he pointed at a tattered, three-story shop some distance ahead. Good. We'll go meet with guild leader Black Flame now. Elder Wu nodded. He then made his way to the wanderer's shop together with Thousand Lives and Modern Rain. Chapter 2806, The Astonishing Zero-Wing Dragonheart City, Wanderer's Shop. When Elder Wu's group of three entered the shop, a magnificent sight instantly entered their eyes. The scenery within the shop was a stark contrast to its dilapidated facade. What's going on here? Thousand Lives was astonished as she inspected the space within the building. This place looks completely different from the last time I visited. On her previous visits to the Wanderer's shop, the building's interior had looked as dilapidated as its exterior. And while the shop sold excellent items, everything here was absurdly priced. If one weren't in a hurry to obtain a specific item, one wouldn't come here to shop. Now, not only had the shop's interior become splendid, but the shop's area had also expanded from a cramped room to half a basketball court. The number of items on display had doubled, and the item quality was drastically better. Now almost everything on display was a precious treasure. Tier 3 magic scrolls, master potions, alchemy gold. The alchemy gold in particular was a treasure of alchemy. It could increase not only the success rate of forging by 15%, but also the basic attributes of the forged item by 10%. Moreover, it was even effective in the production of epic weapons and equipment. However, alchemy gold was impossible to find on the market. Players could obtain it only from ancient ruins. Alchemy gold was even rarer than epic items. Nevertheless, the Wanderer's shop had a total of 10 ingots of alchemy gold for sale. Moreover, they were only on the first floor right now. The Wanderer's shop had 3 floors, and the value of the products sold in the shop increased with each subsequent floor. In other words, the products on the first floor were the lowest in quality. Rain, take a look around afterward. If you see anything we need, buy it. Elder Wu instructed Modern Rain. When he saw the items sold in the shop, even he was moved. The items sold here were indeed exceedingly expensive, with the cheapest item priced at 20 ancient gold and valuable items like the alchemy gold priced at 1,000 ancient gold. However, most of the items sold here were nigh impossible to purchase in the outside world. Besides, 13 Thrones was in urgent need of items such as alchemy gold. After the major system update, monsters became much more difficult to deal with. Previously, Tier 3 teams could cope with Grand Lord ranked monsters, even with just fine gold weapons and equipment. Now, however, Tier 3 teams needed to be fully equipped in dark gold weapons and equipment. Moreover, the team's MT would need to have 2 or 3 pieces of epic equipment. Otherwise, tanking a Grand Lord would be incredibly tough without help. Needless to say, the requirements for raiding mythic monsters were even higher. Players could no longer rely on just their combat standards to defeat powerful monsters. They also needed epic weapons and equipment to support them. Otherwise, the benefits of exploring level 120+ maps weren't worth the cost. Meanwhile, alchemy gold increased the success rate of producing epic weapons and equipment. In the hands of an advanced master forger, success was almost guaranteed. Moreover, the produced item would also have a 10% boost to its basic attributes. Yes, sir. Modern Rain nodded after snapping out of his daze. Elder Wu's group proceeded to the second floor. And upon seeing the items displayed there, Modern Rain very nearly drooled. This was because the second floor actually sold epic items. Although these epic items weren't weapons or equipment, they were still incredibly rare and useful. Confinement Crystal, epic consumable, seals a 2,000-yard radius and lowers the basic attributes of all enemies within the magic array by 40%, 25% for Tier 4, for 2 hours. Wind Manipulating Rope, epic item, increases the movement speed of land mounts by 15% and flying mounts by 25%. The display of epic items was simply dizzying. With a single glance, they discovered at least 60 epic items. What rendered them speechless were the prices. Even the cheapest epic item cost 1,500 ancient gold. However, they had to admit that these epic items were all things the various powers desired. Aside from epic items, all sorts of excellent tools required by lifestyle players were also available, such as a set of dark gold alchemy tools. The only problem was that the set cost 5,000 ancient gold. After Elder Wu and the others browsed through the items sold on the second floor, they felt as if they had just walked into a treasure house. Every item on sale here moved their hearts. Unfortunately, the more astonishing an item was, the more astonishing its price was. With just the 60,000 ancient gold they had on hand, they could purchase only a few items from this floor. Just as Elder Wu's group was about to head to the third floor to take a look, a lithe figure suddenly blocked their way. The frightening aura this person exuded instantly subjected Elder Wu and the others to powerful pressure. No outsiders are allowed beyond this point, Yuluo said softly to Elder Wu's group. If you wish to shop here, you can do so only on the first and second floors. When Thousand Lives and Modern Rain saw Yuluo, they couldn't help doubting their eyes. Tier 4. A bona fide Tier 4 cleric. Both Thousand Lives and Modern Rain recognized Yuluo. After all, Yuluo had been one of Heaven's Blade's team leaders. Simultaneously, she was one of the few peak experts operating on Dragonheart Island. Only, they never thought that Yuluo would get promoted to Tier 4 already. After all, anyone capable of getting promoted to Tier 4 at this stage of the game had the full support of an entire guild. Yet Yuluo, a cleric who had gone missing 1 month ago, had actually reappeared now as a Tier 4 cleric. This was simply unbelievable. Little Missy, may I know if you are the one running this wanderer's shop? Elder Wu couldn't help asking the question on his mind. No, this shop is run by guild leader Black Flame. I am only managing this place on his behalf, Yuluo said, shaking her head. Black Flame runs this place? Elder Wu was stunned. In its current magnificent state, the wanderer's shop was most likely worth 1,000,000 ancient gold or more. Elder Wu might have believed it if Heaven's Blade owned this place. After all, Heaven's Blade had been operating on Dragonheart Island for a long time now. However, he was told that Feng actually owned this shop. How could he swallow such a tale? While Elder Wu was stunned, Thousand Lives quickly reacted asking, "We are from 13 Thrones. We are acquainted with guild leader Black Flame, and we currently have business to discuss with him. Can we meet him now?" "I'm afraid you will have to wait a while," Yuluo said, shaking her head. Over a dozen of Dragonheart Island's powers are currently discussing business with guild leader Black Flame, so it isn't appropriate for you to enter now. However, you won't have to wait too long either. I believe they will be done in another dozen minutes or so. Over a dozen powers? Elder Wu was slightly surprised. He never thought that so many of Dragonheart Island's powers had already made a move. All right, we'll wait. Elder Wu had expected that some of Dragonheart Island's powers would try to meet with Feng since Feng was basically the overlord of Dragonheart Island now. It was only natural for guilds and adventurer teams to try to partner with Zero Wing. However, Elder Wu wasn't too worried about these other guilds and adventurer teams. After all, unlike them, 13 Thrones had the city building order, something Zero Wing urgently needed, as a bargaining chip. After waiting for around a dozen minutes, Elder Wu's group saw more of Dragonheart Island's local powers arrive, and join them waiting on the second floor. Among these powers was the Four Saints Society, a super guild that was equal in strength to 13 Thrones, represented by its first vice guild leader, Intoxicated Drunkard. He was a monster with the title of Strongest Shield of the Sea. Unlike other superpowers, though, the Four Saints Society had focused its development entirely on the sea. Its naval strength now rivaled that of the 5 great super guilds. Intoxicated Drunkard's arrival surprised even Elder Wu. However, as the various powers observed each other, Yuluo, who had been quietly standing guard by the staircase, suddenly said, "Guild leader Black Flame just finished his discussions with the first batch of powers. You may now go upstairs." "Will everyone be going together?" Thousand Lives asked. They wanted to negotiate with Feng in private. A group negotiation was out of the question. That's right. There are too many powers seeking to meet with guild leader Black Flame. Holding private discussions would take too long. Yuluo nodded. If you wish to meet with guild leader Black Flame privately, you can return a few days later. You people. Thousand Lives grew a little angry at Yuluo's words. They were representatives of 13 Thrones, a super guild. They had already shown plenty of respect by waiting here for over a dozen minutes. Yet, their treatment was no different from what the other powers here received. Thousand, it doesn't matter. We'll enter together if we have to, Elder Wu said, chuckling. He then continued in a whisper. Black Flame really knows how to play his cards. He knows the various powers are bringing various partnership offers and business deals to him, so he's basically having everyone compete with each other. At the same time, he gets to choose the best deal. Unfortunately, our proposal is something Black Flame will not be able to refuse. After giving the matter some thought, Thousand Lives nodded in agreement. In any case, Feng would still have to beg them for help. It wouldn't matter whether they negotiated privately or in a group. In this situation, the Four Saints Society's group remained silent. It was evident that they were also confident in their proposal. Meanwhile, upon seeing this situation, Yuluo smiled and said, "Please enter." After Yuluo finished speaking, the representatives of the dozen or so powers present made their way up to the Wanderer's shop's third floor. However, upon arriving on the third floor and seeing the items displayed here, everyone nearly had their eyes fall out of their sockets. Level 120 to level 130 Dark Gold Set Equipment Designs. Level 100 plus Epic Equipment Designs. Advanced Magic Array Designs. Advanced Shop Construction Design. Advanced Hotel Construction Design. Master Icefire Bomb Design. Each and every item displayed here was something that couldn't be found easily in the outside world. However, the items were also astonishingly expensive. Even the cheapest cost 6,000 ancient gold, enough money to purchase a relatively good plot of land in Dragonheart City. However, while the gathered group was agog over the items available on the third floor, a sense of oppression suddenly enveloped everyone, making them feel incredibly uncomfortable. This sense of oppression originated from the two cloaked men standing beside Feng. Tier 48. Why are there even more Tier 4s? Both Elder Wu's group and Intoxicated Drunkard's group were shocked by this situation. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. EU first, it was Heaven's Blade's Yuluo. Now, 2 more Tier 4 players actually appeared behind Feng. Moreover, the two men's auras were much stronger than that of any of the Tier 4 players they had come across before. Tier 4 players currently stood at the very top of God's Domain's player hierarchy. Having one Tier 4 player would already allow a player force to gain a stable foothold in the game's currently chaotic state, and become an object of fear for the various superpowers. Feng currently had 3 Tier 4 players on his side, including Feng and Fire Dance. This meant Zero Wing had a total of 5 Tier 4 players under its command. This caliber of strength was simply maddening. Even the 5 great super guilds were unlikely to have as many Tier 4 players as Zero Wing did. Meanwhile, after scanning the crowd before him, Feng said calmly, "Everyone, if you have something to say, please say it directly. I still have many matters to attend to, so I truly do not have time for beating around the bush." Chapter 2807, 3-Star Wanderer's Shop. Feng's statement was like a hammer that struck everyone's mind. For a time, those intent on negotiating with Feng to maximize their own profits were nonplussed. Even Elder Wu, who had come here brimming with confidence, was momentarily at a loss for words. Feng's display of power was simply too astonishing. Zero Wing's strength had severely exceeded Elder Wu's expectations. The 4 Tier 4 players here in this Wanderer's Shop plus the 3 Tier 4 experts over at the Twin Towers Kingdom meant Zero Wing had a total of 7 Tier 4 players on its side. With such strength, even NPC forces would find dealing with Zero Wing tough. While the gathered crowd suspected that Feng was trying to instill fear into them by showing off his power, Feng himself didn't think he was doing such a thing at all. This was because he was truly busy. Initially, Feng planned to contact Heaven's Blade's commander after entering Dragonheart City. However, for some reason, Divine Edge and the others couldn't contact Zwei, not even through offline means. This situation temporarily prevented Zero Wing and Heaven's Blade from furthering their partnership, and it severely affected Feng's plans. Fortunately, Divine Shadow had agreed to gather up the remaining Heaven's Blade members and put Heaven's Blade under Zero Wing's banner in the meantime. Now, Heaven's Blade was barely considered an adventurer team subordinated to Zero Wing, and had to obey Feng's arrangements. Dragonheart Island's various powers had long since split Heaven's Blade's territories inside the World Tower among themselves after the adventurer team disbanded. However, Warblood's fall granted Dragonheart Island's various powers a new opportunity to gain more territory. Hence, Feng had tasked Divine Shadow with snatching Warblood's territory first. After all, these territories were important sources of ancient coins. He couldn't keep Heaven's Blade's members fed for free. Aside from territories inside the World Tower, Heaven's Blade also had over a dozen shops in key locations inside Dragonheart City. Feng planned on bringing some of Candlelight's products to sell in these shops. As for the lands surrounding the World Tower, due to Zwei's absence, Divine Shadow could only delegate one medium-sized land to Zero Wing with his authority. What this land would be used for was entirely up to Feng. However, half of the profits the land generated would have to be split with Heaven's Blade. After all, there were still plenty of people in the adventurer team that needed nurturing. Feng had no opinion in regard to this situation. On the contrary, he was very happy to secure the management rights of a medium-sized land. After all, Zero Wing's members also had to explore the World Tower. The hotel built on a small-sized land was hardly enough for Zero Wing's purposes. A medium-sized hotel would alleviate the guild's pressure. Hence, Feng needed to arrange what kind of hotel to construct. Aside from this, Feng also received another piece of good news when he entered Dragonheart City. The Wanderer's shop was eligible for promotion to 3-star status. Originally, he had only planned to have the Wanderer's shop purchase some epic materials, and the precious materials necessary to construct the small mobile fortress. He never thought that in the time he was away, the Wanderer's shop would actually meet the conditions for promotion to 3-star status. So long as a Wanderer's shop reached 3-star status, it would undergo a qualitative transformation. Hence, Feng had decisively spent 30,000 of the ancient gold the Wanderer's shop had earned during his absence, and upgraded the shop to 3-star status. However, before he could even check out the 3-star Wanderer's shop specifics, Dragonheart City's various powers had come looking for him already. This forced him to push back his schedule and negotiate with these profit-hungry powers, seeking a share of Warblood's corpse. Meanwhile, after silence enveloped the room for a short moment, Intoxicated Drunkard, the Four Saints Society's vice-guild leader, stepped forward. Guild leader Black Flame, I understand that Zero Wing is planning to partner with Heaven's Blade to annex all of Warblood's resource spots. However, although Blood Oath is currently imprisoned and Warblood is in chaos, Warblood's backer, the Secret Hand Association, is not to be trifled with. With Secret Hand's presence, annexing the 17 resource spots Warblood holds on the 4th underground floor will be difficult. Of course, I believe that with your strength, annexing those resource spots shouldn't be a problem. However, maintaining them will be. Such a task will require a large number of experts. It can't be done with just a few Tier 4 experts. Hence, the Four Saints Society wishes to partner with Zero Wing to go against Warblood and Secret Hand. Intoxicated Drunkard said confidently. Once we annex all of Warblood's resource spots on the 4th floor, each of our sides will take half. Of course, we won't let Zero Wing give up these resource spots for nothing. After saying so, Intoxicated Drunkard took out a city-building order from his bag. The Four Saints Society understands that Zero Wing is currently having difficulty defending the Secret Covenant Tower. However, with this city-building order, Zero Wing can instantly construct a guild city beside the tower. With this guild city to fall back on, Zero Wing should have a much easier time repelling the various superpowers. In addition, the Four Saints Society will also trade various rare materials and level 110 plus secret silver weapons and equipment with Zero Wing. We will sell these items to Zero Wing at market value. May I know what you think of this, Guild Leader Black Flame? When intoxicated drunkard took out the city building order, the other powers' representatives were dumbfounded. This situation also made many of the powers seeking to partner with Zero Wing despair. The Four Saints Society was a super guild. Only a few powers operating on Dragonheart Island could match its resources, manpower, and background. Even setting aside the fact that the Four Saints Society was a super guild, just the city building order alone made it impossible for the various powers present to compete with the Four Saints Society. This was because the city building order was what Zero Wing currently needed the most. At this time, a gloomy expression appeared on Elder Wu's face. He never thought that the Four Saints Society would have a city building order too. This would undoubtedly increase the competition. After the silence in the room had stretched for some time, Feng swept a glance at the various powers' representatives. May I know if anyone else has something to say? If not, I will have to ask you to leave. I still have to continue detailed discussions with Vice Guild Leader Drunkard, Feng said in a calm tone. However, his interest in the city building order was obvious to everyone present. Upon seeing this situation, intoxicated Drunkard smiled in satisfaction. He was very confident in the success of the partnership this time, as he was certain Zero Wing wouldn't be able to resist the city building order's temptation. Hence, he had paid no heed to having to attend negotiations together with the other powers. What should we do now, Elder Wu? Thousand Lives asked anxiously. The World Tower's fourth underground floor was crucial for them to search for Tier 4 legacy lands. The influence of a Tier 4 player was not something Tier 3 players could hope to match. Every addition of a Tier 4 player could increase a guild's overall strength by a large margin. Simultaneously, Tier 4 players were crucial in resisting the invasion of NPC forces. For the current super guilds, Tier 3 players were no longer the thing they lacked the most. After all, they had the required foundation and resources to nurture a large number of high-caliber experts. Even without complete Tier 3 legacies, it was only a matter of time before these experts reached Tier 3. As proof of this point, not one of the superpowers attempting to wrestle control over the Secret Covenant Tower was a super guild. Only super first-rate guilds, which were lacking in foundation and resources, were contending for the tower. However, the World Tower's fourth underground floor, which could reliably generate Tier 4 legacy lands, was a different story. Moreover, the World Tower still had the fifth underground floor and beyond. The chances of Tier 4 legacy lands appearing in these locations were most likely even higher. However, if a power did not possess a base of operations on the fourth underground floor, exploring the even more dangerous fifth underground floor would be utterly impossible for this power. Just as the various powers' representatives were about to turn around and leave, a deep voice resounded in the room. Wait a minute. Guild Leader Black Flame. Suddenly, Elder Wu said, 13 Thrones plans on partnering with Zero Wing as well. Moreover, the conditions we offer will not be any inferior to the Four Saints Societies. After saying so, Elder Wu also brought out a city building order. Crap. Another city building order? The representatives of the various powers present gasped at this situation. The city building order was an incomparably rare item, no less rare than fragmented legendary items. Meanwhile, it was many times more valuable than fragmented legendary items. After all, there was no way a fragmented legendary item could compare with an entire guild city. When Elder Wu took out a city building order, intoxicated drunkard's complexion darkened slightly. This is interesting. What should have originally been a monopoly has now become a two-sided competition. I wonder how Black Flame will decide. Both parties are super guilds, and neither is weaker than the other. Moreover, both have their own advantages as well. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. The various powers' representatives couldn't help their curiosity as they looked at Elder Wu and intoxicated drunkard. They wondered how Feng would proceed in this situation. By stating that 13 Thrones would match the Four Saints Society's offer, Elder Wu was basically hinting to intoxicated drunkard for their two guilds to avoid competing with each other. That way, they could maximize the profits from Zero Wing. Simultaneously, his words also compelled Feng to make a decision. Feng should choose to partner with either 13 Thrones or the Four Saints Society. If Feng refused to choose one, then negotiations would not proceed. Naturally, intoxicated drunkard quickly picked up on Elder Wu's intentions. Hence, he remained silent and simply looked at Feng. Evidently, he planned on taking the same stance as Elder Wu. It seems both of you came with sincerity for cooperation. Feng smiled as he looked at the two city-building orders before him. Unfortunately, I cannot agree to any of your conditions. Chapter 2808. Feng's conditions you can't agree? What do you mean by that, Guild Leader Black Flame? Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard were confused when they heard Feng's response. Similarly, the representatives of the other powers present were stunned by Feng's words. Originally, they thought that they would see an intense clash between 13 Thrones and the Four Saints Society, and Zero Wing would decide how to settle the fight. Yet, Feng had outright rejected both guilds. What was going on here? Is Black Flame trying to teach Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard a lesson for banding together? Probably. After all, Zero Wing isn't faring that well over at the Twin Towers Kingdom. It definitely needs a city-building order. If I were in Black Flame's shoes, I would probably do something like this too. After all, that's half of the 4th floor's resource spots as well as fortresses and Tier 4 legacy lands. Trading away all these things just for one city-building order is simply absurd. Although the two super guilds offered to help garrison the resource spots, that kind of help is inconsequential. With Black Flame's status and deterrence on Dragonheart Island, there's no way anyone would dare have any designs on Warblood's resource spots and fortresses. As the various representatives discussed Feng's actions and realized his aim, they couldn't help admiring him for his wisdom. He had thoroughly placed both super guilds in a bind with this move of his. After all, both the Four Saints Society and 13 Thrones were incredibly desperate to produce Tier 4 players. This was because a few super first-rate guilds had already produced Tier 4 players, yet these two super guilds had not produced one even now. In terms of top combatants, the two guilds had already fallen way behind their peers. Hence, the two guilds' desperation for Tier 4 players. Otherwise, with the status of these two super guilds, they wouldn't take the initiative to seek cooperation with Zero Wing at all. While the onlookers were discussing quietly among themselves, Feng looked at Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard and said, "Please do not misunderstand. I see your sincerity in this matter. However, a city-building order isn't particularly urgent for Zero Wing. In fact, you can even say that we don't need it." Don't need it? Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard smiled subconsciously when they heard Feng's words. May we know what you need most now, Guild Leader Black Flame? The two of them felt that Feng was basically treating them like 3-year-old children. If he were the guild leader of any other guild, they might actually believe these words. After all, a guild city would only increase the number of strongholds a guild owned by one. However, with NPC forces currently running rampant, having one additional stronghold meant that a guild would have to spread its forces even thinner, which was indeed an incredibly troublesome matter. In the case of Zero Wing, though these words were blatant nonsense. However, Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard knew that it wouldn't be appropriate for them to call Feng out on his lie, so they decided to play along with him. Manpower. Ignoring the act the two people before him were putting on, Feng laughed and said, "You two might not believe me, but what Zero Wing lacks now is only manpower. We do not lack anything else. If your two guilds really wish to partner with Zero Wing and acquire World Tower's 4th underground floor's resource spots, take out some real sincerity." Truth be told, the city-building order was something Feng could do without. A small mobile fortress was basically half a city. Not to mention, an ordinary guild city wouldn't suffice to let Zero Wing exert complete control over the secret Covenant Tower. Only a fortress could do that. This was because a guild city was more focused on defense than offense. A guild city mainly served as a place for players to rest and trade. At best, it could provide some benefits to the players heading into the secret Covenant Tower. It couldn't actually prevent other powers from forcing their way into the tower. In the end, Zero Wing would still have to rely on its own strength to accomplish this feat. This just so happened to be something beyond Zero Wing right now. However, It was a different story for a small mobile fortress. Mobile fortresses possess great defensive capabilities and were top-tier war weapons. Otherwise, they wouldn't have been able to become the overlords of the sky. Manpower? Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard nodded slightly at the same time. Although they found Feng's words more agreeable now, they still felt he was putting on an act. The two of them then exchanged looks and came to a tacit understanding. Since Feng insisted on acting, they would play along and see how long Feng could keep doing so. Smiling, Intoxicated Drunkard asked, "May I know how you plan on having our two guilds cooperate with you, Guild Leader Black Flame?" "Simple. I just need your two guilds to supply me with 300 advanced forgers, 200 advanced alchemists, 500 advanced architects, 100 advanced magicians, and 2 master magicians. I'll also need 10,000 Tier 3 players. Lend these people to me for half a month," Feng said, chuckling. "If you can agree to that, I will give you 2 of Warblood's small fortresses." When Feng finished speaking, Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard were stunned. They couldn't understand Feng's purpose. Not only did he not want their city-building orders, but he was even asking for a large number of lifestyle players. Although Feng had also asked for 10,000 Tier 3 experts, the various superpowers already had around 50,000 Tier 3 expert players on average at this stage of the game. Lending 10,000 Tier 3 experts wouldn't be a problem for their 2 super guilds. On the contrary, the conditions Feng offered were incredibly advantageous to their 2 guilds. With a small fortress on the World Tower's 4th underground floor, their 2 guilds could reside on the 4th floor in the future. Simultaneously, they would have the necessary foundation to explore the 5th underground floor. "May I know your thoughts on this?" Feng asked, smiling. "City building order? The 4th underground floor's small fortresses? Tier 4 legacy lands?" These things were inconsequential to his present self. So long as he had the small mobile fortress, nobody in God's domain would be able to threaten Zero Wing. Not even Tier 4 players. The only problem was the massive scale of the small mobile fortress's construction, which required a considerable amount of manpower. It wasn't something he could accomplish easily by himself. Initially, he had been considering having all of Candlelight's lifestyle players halt their work and focus on constructing the small mobile fortress. He never imagined that 2 super guilds would send themselves to his doorsteps. "Is what you say true, Guild Leader Black Flame?" Intoxicated Drunkard asked skeptically. "You can rest assured on this point. We can sign a contract for this. Your 2 guilds will be free to capture the 2 promised fortresses, and Zero Wing will not lay a finger on them. I can even stop Secret Hands NPCs from interfering with your 2 guilds," Feng said with a sincere smile on his face. Upon hearing Feng's words of assurance, Elder Wu said without hesitation, "In that case, I agree to your offer on behalf of 13 Thrones, Guild Leader Black Flame." What super guilds lacked the least was manpower. Even though Feng was asking for quite a lot of manpower, it was well within their tolerance. The Four Saints Society has no problem with this arrangement either. Intoxicated Drunkard said, an indescribably happy smile appearing on his face. For the Four Saints Society, being able to gain one of Warblood's small fortresses, just by loaning some manpower, was an incredibly profitable trade. It was much better than surrendering a precious city building order. As for the threat of the Secret Hand Association, just one word from Feng would most likely prevent any of the association's Tier 4 NPCs from setting foot in the World Tower. After all, the Holy Star Knight Legion was both the protector and manager of the World Tower. Prohibiting NPCs that attacked players from entering the World Tower would be an easy task for the Knight Legion. Without the Secret Hand Association, the only Tier 4 combatant Warblood would have on its side would be Autumn Plant. While he would still pose a problem, the Four Saints Society and 13 Thrones could handle him. Was upon seeing this situation, the other powers' representatives grew envious. They never thought that Feng would offer such loose conditions to the 2 super guilds. Nonetheless, fulfilling these conditions was still impossible for the other powers. Setting aside the large number of lifestyle players Feng sought, just the condition of 10,000 Tier 3 experts was already beyond them. Only the superpowers had the ability to do so. Elder Wu and Intoxicated Drunkard signed a contract with Feng on behalf of their respective guilds right away. According to the contract, 13 Thrones and the Four Saints Society would lend the stated manpower to Feng for half a month. Moreover, all operations for this half a month had to be kept a secret. Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. After signing the contract, the two super guilds promptly summoned the necessary manpower to Dragonheart Island. This was because the contract would take effect only after all the required manpower was assembled and transferred to Feng. Before that, their two guilds shouldn't even think of capturing Warblood's small fortresses. Having concluded negotiations with the two super guilds, Feng finally had some free time to himself. Inside the quiet third floor, Feng took out the several items he acquired from killing Sabrid and began inspecting them. Previously, he had been too busy to inspect Sabrid's loot. Now that he had finished his tasks, he could finally take a proper look at them. Sabrid had been the vice commander of Dragonheart City's City Defense Legion, a level 160, Tier 4 NPC, and an executive of the Secret Hand Association. Nobody would believe that he had only one fragmented legendary item on him. Chapter 2809. Half a step away, Sabrid had dropped a total of 6 items. Aside from the fragmented legendary greatsword Demonic Shadow, the 5 remaining items looked very ordinary. In fact, they looked so normal that Feng was confused when he first stored them in his bag. This was because the 5 items appeared to be a set. Of the 5 items, 4 were mirrors made entirely of crystal. However, unlike the fragmented legendary greatsword, these 4 mirrors did not radiate a frightening aura. More precisely, they did not even have a hint of aura. They looked ordinary beyond ordinary. As for the 5th item, it was an ink-black crystal the size of a basketball. Like the 4 crystalline mirrors, this crystal ball was similarly indescribably ordinary. It did not radiate even a whiff of mana. Interesting. Realization flashed in Feng's eyes as he looked at the ink-black crystal ball and 4 crystalline mirrors placed before him. If I didn't take a closer look at them, I would never have thought these 5 items actually had a magic disguise. The standard of this disguise is also absurdly high. It is definitely at the half-step Grandmaster standard. In God's domain, apart from special items, players needed to use the appraisal skill on most items to inspect their information. However, there was also another type of item that was outside of this category, and that was magically disguised items. Items that had magic disguise used on them would have their information concealed. Using the appraisal skill on these items would show that they were no different from ordinary garbage. However, applying a magic disguise on an item was a complicated process, and even a master magician would need several hours just to complete a master magic disguise's magic array. Needless to say, placing a half-step Grandmaster magic disguise would be even more tedious. And worse, the disguise would disappear whenever the disguised item was used. One would have to apply a new magic disguise to disguise the item again. Thus, magically disguised items were incredibly rare in God's domain. Most players wouldn't even come across one throughout their career in God's domain. And if players did come across such an item, they would often treat it as garbage and dispose of it. However, Sabrid was both the vice commander of Dragonheart City's City Defense Knight Legion and a level 160, Tier 4 NPC. In God's domain, Dragonheart City could be considered a kingdom. In terms of status, the neutral city rivaled imperial capitals. Hence, despite being only the vice commander of one of Dragonheart City's Knight Legions, Sabrid's status was higher than even that of magistrates that managed the various kingdoms' main cities. In addition, Sabrid was also an executive of the Secret Hand Association, the strongest NPC force on Dragonheart Island. If one were to say that an NPC like Sabrid had dropped a bunch of odds and ends, let alone Feng, even ordinary players wouldn't believe it. Of course, perceiving such a high-level disguise wasn't an easy task. Let alone the standard appraisal skill, even Feng's omniscient eyes would allow him to see only the cover information of a disguised item. Only those with great mastery over magic arrays would notice that an item was magically disguised. The 5 items placed before Feng were precisely magically disguised items. On the surface, These 5 items looked ordinary and unremarkable. If not for Feng's in-depth understanding of the operating principles of mana, he wouldn't have noticed anything wrong at all. Thank goodness I'm already an advanced master magician. Otherwise, I really wouldn't have noticed such an exquisite disguise. Looking at the 5 items, Feng couldn't contain his elation as he studied the disguise. While it was possible for one to remove a magic disguise forcibly, that option should only be a last resort, because doing so would damage the disguised item. Not to mention, the removal of a magic disguise was a process favored by all magicians. The removal of a magic disguise was an opportunity for a magician to improve their knowledge, since the removal process tested a person's knowledge and control over magic arrays. One would have to locate the fixed mana routes and identify the manipulation method of the magic array to remove the disguise. This was why players seeking to improve their knowledge of magic arrays would usually purchase disguised items from magic shops. Only, the more profound a magic disguise was, the greater their price and rarity. Magic disguises at the master rank and above were especially rare. This was partly because master magicians could earn much more money through selling other magic arrays. Moreover, creating these other magic arrays took much less time than the master magic disguises magic array did. Creating master magic disguises simply wasn't cost-effective. Subsequently, the seconds and minutes passed by rapidly. While Feng attempted to undo the disguise, 3 hours elapsed in the blink of an eye. He had started with manipulating 6 independent strands of mana simultaneously to trigger the magic array's mana nodes, then gradually increased that number to 12. Feng had to admit that a half-step Grandmaster magic disguise was truly profound. Even after he had switched to manipulating 16 strands of mana simultaneously, he managed to trigger only 60% of the magic array's mana nodes. This isn't right. There are over 1,000 mana nodes on this thing. If I merely follow the predetermined mana routes, I doubt I can trigger every mana node even if I control 32 strands of mana simultaneously. The more Feng studied the half-step Grandmaster magic disguise, the more he found it to be amazing. The creation of this thing had already exceeded the limits of the human mind. Although it was only simple mana manipulation, the degree of multitasking required to fully activate it put him in a huge bind. He simply couldn't get all of the magic array's 1,000+ mana nodes running simultaneously with his current standard. Afterward, Feng earnestly inspected the magic disguise once more. He had a vague feeling that he had found a pattern, but he couldn't tell what it was exactly. Immediately, he took out a crystal of souls from his bag and consumed it to calm and empty his mind. 1 hour. 2 hours. 4 hours. Before Feng realized it, he had already spent half a day scrutinizing the magic array's mana nodes. I see. Every several dozen of these nodes form a small magic array, and some of the nodes on these small magic arrays connect with other small magic arrays. If I start my attack from the crucial nodes, I should be able to save myself a lot of trouble. After thinking up to this point, Feng began manipulating the magic array's mana once more. This time though he started with the mana nodes with the highest repetition rate. Completion rate 20%, 40%, 60%, 80%. When the disguise magic array lit up, Feng grew ecstatic. However, his joy wasn't just from cracking the magic array. It was also because his understanding of magic arrays had further improved, and he finally grasped the difference between advanced master magicians and half-step grandmaster magicians. The sound of glass shattering echoed in the room. Subsequently, the undisguised crystalline mirror made the space within the room incomparably cold and heavy. What powerful mana! Read latest chapters at Wuxia World. Even for Feng, this was the first time he had felt such strange and heavy mana. It felt as if the object before him wasn't an item, but an ancient god instead. In fact, he even had the misconception that the energy flowing around him was no longer mana, but a more terrifying energy that carried great destructive power. If not for him having reached Tier 4 already, he might have lost consciousness just from being subjected to this oppressive energy. Crap. Who was this Sabrid? Feng was dumbfounded when the crystalline mirror's statistics appeared in front of him. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.